Story number 1. The Cooler on the Porch. I booked the beach rental because it was cheap, quiet, and close enough to the water that I could smell the salt without paying for a view. I told myself I needed a weekend to reset, to sleep, to finish a small pile of work I had carried around like a stone in my bag. When I pulled up just before sunset, the sky over the dunes had that rippled orange look like fish scales, and the heat held on even with the breeze. Cicadas droned in, the scrub grass. A kid somewhere squealed at a dog. It felt plain, ordinary, harmless. The porch had 2 chairs, a welcome mat, and a red plastic cooler sitting centered like a stubborn guest. The cooler was the cheap kind from grocery stores, with a white lid and scratches on the sides. On the door, the host had taped a laminated sheet of rules. I glanced, smiled at the formality, and read them. Rule 1. Do not move the red cooler from the porch. Rule 2. Close the blinds before 11 at night. Rule 3. If you hear taps on the glass door when the wind shifts inland, do not answer. I laughed a little at the last one. It sounded like a joke to make the place memorable. I pressed my palm to the door, felt the glass warm from the day, and went inside. The living room was simple and clean. A sagging couch, a low table, and sliding glass doors that opened to the porch. A faint smell of sunscreen lived in the air, like someone had sprayed it into the walls last summer, and it decided to stay. On a nail by the kitchen there hung a small bottle opener shaped like a fish, brass with a chip out of the tail. I liked it enough to say, "You're cute," out loud without thinking. I grabbed a cold soda from the fridge and popped the cap with the opener. The metal had a warm, smooth feel like a coin in the sun. The first hour passed in the soft glow of being somewhere that was not my apartment. I unpacked, ran the fan, skimmed some emails, and watched the light die over the dunes. When the breeze pushed through the screen door, it smelled like seagrass and hot tar from the road. The cicadas kept time. I cleaned up the kitchen counter more than it needed. I'm one of those people who straighten things when they are alone. Around 9, I remembered the blinds. The sliding doors wore heavy off-white blinds that clacked softly when I drew them. The porch light made flat shadows across them, like someone was standing on the other side with a sheet. I told myself to ignore it and sat down to read. The sunscreen smell lifted for a moment and then returned, a little stronger. It felt like the air was already sticky with it, as if a parade of July afternoons had stayed, sweating politely in the corners. Near 10, the breeze shifted. I do not mean it as poetry. The air really turned and came from inland, warm and carrying dust from the road and a faint, sweet rot like something had fermented under the porch. The blinds made a different sound in that change, a low tremble. When the first taps came on the glass, I thought it was a moth. Tap, tap, a pause, then a third tap, lighter or farther away. I froze, not because I was scared, but because the rules came back to me in a single line. If you hear taps on the glass door when the wind shifts inland, do not answer. I waited. The taps did not come again. I told myself some kid had bounced a pebble or a seed pod had dropped from the gutter. I stood up and went to the kitchen for another soda. The bottle opener winked at me from its nail like a tiny fisheye made of brass. I took it down and turned it in my hand. The chip in the tail felt like a bite out of a cookie. I slept oddly that first night. I had set my phone on the table by the couch and left the sliding door locked, the blinds closed, the porch light off. Somewhere past midnight, the cicadas quieted, and something else took their place. A very soft swish like a towel dragged across wet tile. When I woke briefly in the dark, I smelled sunscreen again, stronger, like someone had opened a bottle right under my nose. I told myself I was imagining it, and wrapped a thin throw around my shoulders. I was awake enough to notice my mouth tasted like salt, even though I had not gone down to the water. I fell back asleep, listening for the tap that did not come, and the morning the air was already warm. The porch looked normal from inside, blinds still down, light off, 2 chairs, and the red cooler centered on the mat. When I slid the door open to step out, I saw 2 things that were not how I left them. The first was the cooler, which had left a wet ring on the wood around its base, a perfect circle of darker boards, as if it had been sweating all night. The second was the bottle opener, which lay on the welcome mat beside the cooler as if someone had set it down after opening a drink on the porch. I picked it up and felt a coldness that did not match the heat. The metal was damp. A clean slip of condensation touched my fingers and then vanished. I looked at the nail by the kitchen door through the glass and told myself I must have absent-mindedly carried the opener out last night and dropped it. I could not remember doing it, but I could not remember not doing it either. I dried the opener on my shirt and hung it back. The cooler bothered me more. I did not like the ring of water under it. It made the porch look messy. The first rule popped up in my head, simple and stubborn. Do not move the red cooler from the porch. I told myself. It meant do not remove it entirely. Do not nudge it for cleaning. I lifted the cooler by the handle just enough to wipe the ring with my foot, a small sweep to clear the wet circle. The cooler was heavy in a way I did not expect. The plastic flexed and complained. A deeper cold hummed in it, like a fridge that runs too hard. I shifted it a hand's width, cleared the ring and nudged it back into place. The action felt like stepping over a line I could not see. It was a tiny line, and my heel now rested on the other side. I made coffee and called a friend while it brewed. We talked about work and the kind of small gossip that fills the time. I looked at the blinds while we talked and told myself I would keep them closed during the day too, just to stay inside the rules. It felt silly to admit it. It also felt like putting a seatbelt on. No one mocks the seatbelt until it matters. At noon I walked the beach and let my ankles take the water. I did not swim. I did not want to come back damp and track grit inside. On my way to the rental, I passed a line of other porches, some with flags, some with wind chimes, one with a child's plastic shovel stuck blade down in a pot of dead petunias. It surprised me when none of them had a cooler out. It is a beach town. Everyone drags a cooler everywhere, but I did not see another one. Mine, the red one, sat on my porch like it knew it was supposed to be there and wanted to be seen. The second night I counted the hours carefully. I closed the blinds and checked the lock before it was fully dark. I set the bottle opener on the kitchen counter this time and, to be sure, took a photo of it with my phone. I told myself it was a joke I would send to the friend in the morning, with a line like, "Still there." For dinner I ate crackers and fruit and a piece of cheese that tasted like the inside of a warm car. The sunscreen smell rose when I sat on the couch with the fan on. I turned the fan higher and it shifted away, then returned a minute later like it had changed its mind. Around 10, the air turned again. I could tell by the way the blinds shivered, like a shallow breath. Tap, tap. I held my breath and waited. Tap. 3 this time. The last one lighter, or farther away again, like someone tapping cautious knuckles down low where the glass met the frame. My throat felt tight. The second rule said close the blinds before 11. The blinds were closed. The third rule said if you hear taps when the wind shifts inland, do not answer. I did not answer. I did stand up, because sitting still made me feel like a target. I sat back down because standing made me feel like a character in a story who makes the wrong move. My phone buzzed on the table. For a second I thought it was the friend calling, and I felt relief. Then I saw the alert. Porch, camera offline. I had not noticed the tiny black bubble above the slider, a cheap camera pointed at the porch. The offline message hung for a moment, then a second alert arrived, a snapshot captured before it went down. My phone showed the porch in grainy low light, 2 chairs, the cooler, the mat. On the lid of the cooler was a handprint, pale and wet, like someone had set down a damp hand there to steady themselves. The fingers were long, or the image stretched them. The photo did not show me whose hand. There was no one in frame. I told myself that a splash of condensation had formed a shape and the camera had sharpened the edges in the wrong way. I set the phone face down and listened to my own breathing. The tapping did not come again. I decided to go to bed early and wake with the sun, leave the place daylight bright and clean, and drive home a day early. I had work. I had excuses. Before I turned out the lamp, I checked the kitchen counter. The bottle opener sat where I left it. I took a second photo of it, an idiot pair to the first. It felt superstitious in the worst way, the way that makes you ashamed of yourself even if there is no one to see. It was the sound of plastic grinding on wood that woke me in the deep part of the night. Not a tap on the glass this time. A drag. A low, tired scrape. I do not know what time it was. It felt like the hour when your thoughts all become the same thought and nothing you do will make it better. The air was very still. The sunscreen smell had relaxed into something more sour. The drag came again. I stood and went to the doorway of the living room and listened. The dragging stopped. I could see the vague shape of the blinds, bright a little from some neighbor's porch light bleeding around the edges. I whispered, "No." And I meant it in two ways. Something knocked softly on the glass then, not a tap, not a polite testing, but a slow, patient knock, like someone who knows you are home and will stand there all night if that is what it takes. I stepped backward, the way a person does to make it one more step away even if it is only air. The knock became 2 knocks, then 3, then a longer smear, as if a palm slid down the glass. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to call anyone. What would I say? There is a cooler on the porch and something that may be a person, and also, I moved the cooler a little this morning because of a water ring I did not like. Please send help. I decided to move the cooler inside and wedge it against the door. I know how that sounds. The first rule said, do not move the red cooler from the porch. I had already nudged it and nothing had happened except a photograph I could explain away to myself. Barricading the door with it felt brilliant and stupid at the same time. I told myself it would be 1 minute of rule breaking to save a whole body of fear. I lifted the blinds just enough to reach the handle and then stopped. Through the sliver I could see the porch like a line drawing. Chair, cooler. The cooler was closer to the door than it had been. Not by a lot, but enough that the corner of the lid kissed the glass. I could not remember how far it sat earlier. I told myself I was wrong. I slid the lock, cracked the door, and grabbed the handle on the cooler. Cold ran up my arm as if I had plunged my hand into a bucket of ice. The plastic chattered in my grip. The cooler did not move easily. It felt rooted. I pulled, and it scraped. And the scrape was the sound I had heard in the night. I dragged it inside 1 inch, 2 inches, and then the door, pushed by air or weight, tried to slide back into the track and pinch my fingers. The smell of sunscreen swelled and burned my nose. I tugged the cooler past the threshold and shut the door. The lid clicked a little as the pressure changed, as if someone had lifted it a fraction and let it fall. I backed away. My chest hurt the way it does after a long run. The knocking stopped. The night held its breath. The fan made a thread of noise that did not reach me. I listened for footsteps on the porch and heard only the soft rush of whatever the wind had become. I looked at the cooler and hated it, the way it sat there dumb and red and heavy, wet around the base, drawing a new circle on my floor. My mind offered a picture of the inside of it, a white space with a few empty cans, maybe a coil of fishing line, maybe something else, something like hair or a clump of dried seaweed. I did not open it. I did not want to see. I picked up the bottle opener from the counter and slipped it into my pocket without thinking. I do not know why I did that. It felt like a charm. It felt like a joke I was making on fear. The metal warmed quickly against my leg. I told myself that when the sun came up I would leave. I would text the host a long apology and pay any fee, and explain only that the night felt wrong and that I was not built for beach houses, even if I liked the smell of salt. The glass door nudged inward as if someone leaned against it, soft and human. The lock held. A whisper of sound came through, like a fingertip on a clean plate. A slow exhale followed. I stood frozen with my hands at my sides and stared at the line of light under the blinds. A shadow crossed it and paused. I saw, in negative, the shape of a shoulder, the slope of a head turned to listen. The shadow leaned down and the line darkened where a hand met it. The hand stayed, a wait, a patient wait. Then, as if to argue with whatever courage I had left, came the tiniest, Friendliest sound, a fingertip tap just above the handle, once, twice, and a third time lower near the track. My mouth filled with the taste of salt again. I whispered, "Please go." And then, "I cannot." And I did not know which sentence I meant for which thing. I went into the bedroom, took my bag, and left by the front door. I did it quietly, as if I might wake something if I made noise. The air outside felt a degree warmer. My car sat under the dark street like a boat in shallow water. When I opened the door, the seatbelt buckle burned my fingertips. I drove to the all-night gas station at the highway ramp and parked near the ice freezer where the fluorescent light fell in a safe square. The kid behind the counter did not look at me when I bought water. I sat in the car and watched two moths beat themselves against the light inside until they got tired or smart. Around dawn I wrote to the host. I said I was leaving early and that I had moved the cooler in the night and that I was sorry. I said I heard someone on the porch and I did not feel safe. The host wrote back a few minutes later with a short message that did not flavor itself with kindness or anger, just a flat, practiced tone. They said they were sorry I was uncomfortable. They said the rules were for my safety. They said, "Please, put the cooler back on the porch before I go." I drove back to the rental when the sun had the hard white edge of a hot morning. The porch looked the same as always from the street. When I opened the front door, the inside smelled like a mix of stale ocean and chemical sweetness. A damp patch the shape of a cloud marked the floor where the cooler had sat. The cooler itself was not in the living room anymore. It sat back on the porch, centered on the mat, white lid closed. The blinds were down and a little crooked. My phone, which I had left on the table, lay face up and lit. There was a new snapshot from the porch camera. Time stamped a few minutes after I left in the night. The photo showed the cooler in the doorway, half in, half out, and a small smear of something wet on the glass like a nose had pressed there. No person in frame, no detail I could name as dangerous, only my own fear reflected in the screen. I backed away from the door and set my bag by the couch to pick up my keys. My hand passed my pocket and I felt the bottle opener. The brass felt warm, but not like a coin in the sun this time. It felt warm from a body, and I knew it was mine. I put it on the counter just long enough to wipe my palm and then picked it up again. Because I did not like it out of my hand, because it felt wrong to leave it, because I had a stupid idea that it had become some kind of ticket I had already punched. I locked the front door, checked the porch without opening the slider, and left. I told myself that the leftover I would carry away from the weekend was only a story. People love a beach story in the winter. They like to feel warm and scared at the same time. I would tell a version with jokes about the sunscreen smell and the door taps and how a red cooler owned me for a night. I drove home with the windows cracked, 2 fingers, because the car air made me dizzy. I did not look in the rearview mirror more than I had to. In my apartment, I put the bottle opener on the kitchen counter near the sink. I told myself to wash it because it came from a rental, and who knows. I turned on the tap, held it under for a second, and set it on a dish towel to dry. I made coffee. I opened my laptop to write the apology review that I thought the host deserved, and then did not write it at all. My phone buzzed on the table. It was another snapshot from the porch camera at the rental. The message said, "Guest confirmed checkout," which I had not done, and below that, a photo. The porch empty, the cooler in place, the chairs a little off-center. On the lid of the cooler sat a small brass shape that could have been anything in that. Grain, a bottle cap, a key, a coin. It looked like the fish opener. I turned my head slowly toward my counter. The towel lay there, wet with a dark ring, and the opener was gone. I do not like saying what happened next because it makes me feel like a person who chases her own tail. I looked in the sink. I looked in the trash. I checked my bag. I checked the inside pocket where sometimes coins hide. I checked the floor. I checked the counter again. I stood very still. The air in my apartment had shifted without moving, like a room does when someone else enters and stands where you cannot see. A smell of sunscreen rose, light at first, then louder, and I knew it was not in my head because the back of my throat prickled. A slow, polite tap came from the sliding door to my tiny balcony. Once, twice, then a third low near the track. I did not go look. I counted to 7 to keep my hands from doing it on their own. When I reached 7, I kept counting, because it felt like dropping an anchor line. The tap did not come again. My coffee went cold on the table. The towel on the counter had left a perfect wet circle the size of the cooler's base, and in the center of that circle, the fabric was pulled as if something heavy had rested there for a moment and then lifted. The watermark stayed. That night, before 11, I closed my blinds. I do not know what the posted rules are in my building. I made my own. Keep the blinds closed before 11, do not answer taps when the wind is wrong, and do not move what the summer leaves on your porch, even if it looks like it belongs to you. When the city cooled just enough to breathe, the smell faded. I told myself I had imagined the wet circle, that towels dry in odd ways. The bottle opener turned up the next morning sitting on my stovetop, dry and warm, its chipped tail pointing at the glass door. I told myself the building must have shifted, that objects slip when air moves and we do not feel it. I pretended I believed it. I put the opener in a drawer with rubber bands and a broken cork, shut the drawer, and listened. The cicadas were far from the city, and still I could hear them, a heartbeat you can taste. My phone buzzed with a new alert. Motion detected at the balcony. No snapshot available. Camera offline. I will sleep early tonight. I will count to 7 whenever the wind turns inland, and when I hear that gentle, careful tap on the glass. Once, twice, and a third time low near the track. I will keep very still and pretend I am not home. Story number 2, Room 12's ice machine. I pulled off the highway because the sun was melting out of the sky and my eyes were tired. It had been a long summer day on the road. Heat sat in the car, even with the air on. The first roadside place with a vacancy sign was a low strip of rooms with a pale blue office and a soda machine humming by the ice. I wanted a shower, a bed, and quiet. The manager sat behind thick glass with a little speaker. He slid a clipboard through the slot and a pen that had tape around the middle. He pointed at a laminated card taped to the glass, 3 lines in bold. Rule 1. Park under the camera. Rule 2. Do not use the vending machine after midnight. Rule 3. If the ice machine runs dry, stay in your room. He said it all again out loud, like he had said it all 1,000 times. Camera covers the middle row. Please park where it sees you. No vending after midnight. If the ice runs dry, you stay in your room. You call me if you need something. He handed me a metal key on a white plastic tag with a black 12 stamped into it. The key was a little bent, as if someone had tried it in the wrong door too many times. I turned it in my fingers. The metal felt warm, like it had been in a pocket against skin. A box fan in the office rattled in the window. That hum was the sound of every summer I remember. I paid. He pushed over a thin keycard sleeve anyway and wrote Room 12 on it in blue ink. He circled the rules with his pen and slid me a paper map of a place I could see right through the window. The rooms ran in a row like teeth. Each door had a small rectangle of glass beside it and a porch light that tried to be polite about bugs. The ice and vending alcove sat 2 doors down, from 12, half open to the lot. A bucket of mop water leaned there with a gray swirl on top. The ice machine roared and knocked, then went steady. Beside it, the soda machine hummed like a big cat. On the wall above both, a black half-dome camera watched. A hand-drawn arrow below it said, Smile. I pulled the car into a spot under a scraggly tree at the end of the row because shade still felt like a gift. It was not under the camera. I thought about backing up to the middle spots, but the tree made a little patch of cool against the windshield and my head hurt. I told myself the lot was nearly empty. My car would be fine. I carried my bag past the alcove. Cold air bled out from the ice machine like a refrigerator door left open. On the concrete, little half-moons of melted ice made dark commas. The room opened with a push. The air conditioner in the wall thumped on and sent out warm air that had to turn cold later. The bedspread was a color you only see in motels, something between brown and blue. A painting of a boat hung crooked. The bathroom had a bar of soap wrapped in crinkly paper. I set the bent key on the dresser, head of the key pointing at the door like a little arrow. I took a shower and let the water run longer than I needed. I cooled down. I lay on the bed in a towel and felt the air settle into something almost kind. The fan in the air unit hummed, steady as a metronome. I texted a friend that I was stopping for the night in the middle of nowhere and that the place had rules about ice. He sent back a thumbs up and a joke about summer gas stations. I laughed and felt more normal. At about 9, I walked to the office for a snack and a bottle of water. The manager had put a back in 5 sign up, so I used the soda machine. I paid with cash. The can thumped into the slot with a sound that made me think of school. The ice machine coughed out fresh half-moons and overflowed the scoop bin like a little snowbank. A cardboard sign on a string hung from a nail above it. Out of ice. Sorry. It was flipped to the sorry side, but the machine was not sorry. It was very busy. In the near room, someone laughed at a TV show. A truck down by the road idled and then shut off. Heat hit in the concrete. I went back to my room and locked the door. I pulled the curtain a half-inch to make a slit. The light over the alcove made a thin strip down the walkway. The soda machine's face glowed like a night aquarium. I meant to sleep early. My body had other plans. I turned the TV on low and let a home improvement show talk me down. At about 10, the air conditioner fan changed pitch for one breath, then settled. The ice machine knocked once and went quiet. The sudden quiet made me sit up. The fan hum in the wall held steady. I told myself machine cycle. I told myself to stop listening for what would happen next. There was a soft rustle outside, plastic on concrete. Someone dragged an ice bag, or their shoe was wrapped in a bag, or they were carrying something that whispered. The sound went past. My door paused, then went past again the other way. I stood and walked to the slit in the curtain. The walkway was empty. Far down by the office, a porch light died and came back like a held breath. I went back to the bed and texted the friend a dumb line. This ice machine has a personality. I did not send it. It did not feel funny typed out. Near 11, couple checked in 2 doors down. I heard their voices, low and tired. One of them laughed after a pause. In that way, that means you are trying to keep a mood easy. The soda machine spit a can, and then another. Too fast. Someone must have hit the button twice. I decided right then that I would follow the rules like a person with sense. I would park under the camera if I moved the car after breakfast. I would not stand in front of the vending after midnight like a bored kid. If the ice shut off, I would stay in, make do with warm water and stubbornness. Just before midnight, I woke from a quick, mean nap. The room phone was ringing. I had not noticed there was a phone until it made sound. I picked it up and said hello. A click, a breath. No words. Then the line went dead. The air unit fan hummed on. The ice machine knocked once and then stopped, like someone had pulled the plug. The hum under everything in the building dropped out with it. For a long second there was nothing, and the quiet felt as heavy as heat. I stood and went to the door. I did not open it. I pressed 2 fingers to the cheap wood and felt the cool from the metal plate. Through the slit in the curtain, I could see the alcove. The soda machine's light was still on. The ice machine sat like a sleeping animal. No one was there. A dark, wet line on the concrete led from the alcove toward my door and then back again, like a bucket had been dragged and lifted and dragged again. My throat went dry in a way that a soda could not fix. A knock came on my door, soft and friendly. Not a bang, not urgent, just the way you would knock if you did not want to scare someone. I did not answer. The knock came again, a little lower, like the person had leaned. Then the sound of a plastic bag being set down. I could smell cold. It is a strange thing to say, but it smelled like cold. Bleach and freezer air and a little metallic edge. I whispered to the door, "No," as if the door cared. The fan hummed on, and the hum was the only thing that felt like mine. I waited. Footsteps moved away. The plastic rustle went with them. The ice machine coughed twice, dry. A sound like metal on metal came from the alcove, a scoop hitting the chute. Then a voice, not loud, not whispering, something between. You need ice? It was not the manager. It was not anyone I knew. It sounded the way a hallway sounds. If you told me later that I had made it up, I might believe you. In the moment, I did not. I believed it. I stood there and did nothing. That was my choice. I did nothing. I let the minutes stack until my heart slowed down enough to remember other tasks. I brushed my teeth. I put the bent key on the nightstand instead of the dresser. I set my shoes facing the door in a neat line like a person who expects to use them. I lay down and let the TV talk again without putting the sound on. Somewhere after midnight, I got thirsty. It was a small need. It felt foolish to make a plan around it. The water in the bathroom tasted of a hose. I drank anyway. It did not help. I told myself I would buy a bottle from the machine. Then I said the rule out loud. Do not use the vending machine after midnight. I waited 10 minutes and told myself it would be tomorrow. My phone said it was still not tomorrow. I lay there and watched the red numbers roll their slow way forward, and felt more awake with each minute. The ice machine knocked 3 fast knocks, then silence. The fan hum shifted. The lights in the parking lot blinked and came back. Someone laughed again 2 doors down and stopped fast, like they had heard themselves from the outside. I told myself to sleep. I could not make my body do it. At maybe 1, maybe a little later, the room phone rang again. I let it ring twice. I picked it up and did not say hello this time. A click, a long breath. The same voice, or no voice at all. Then the quiet line. I set the receiver down soft and pressed my hand to the table. The metal edge of the nightstand pressed a line into my palm. I stood once more at the door without opening it. The plastic bag was gone from the mat. The wet line on the concrete had grown. It shimmered a little under the light, like an animal path. The ice machine's face had a little digital readout, had not noticed before. It showed a number. It showed 12 in blocky segments, then blinked to ice, then to nothing. The soda machine's display said, exact. I could have been seeing what I wanted to see. I do not think I was. If the ice machine runs dry, stay in your room. The rule was a rope. I held it with my mind. Then a different sound came from the alcove. A small scrape. The echo of a door inside a door. The sound of the scoop moving against plastic. And a voice, not the same tone as the first one. A little higher and wet at the edges, like someone who had been swimming too long. You left your key. I stared at the bent key on my nightstand. It had a new shine along the edge, a small, fresh scratch. I told myself I had made that scratch myself, twisting it. I told myself many things very quickly. Then I broke the rule. I unlocked the door, opened it just enough to slide out, and stepped into the walkway. The air hit my skin like the inside of a dryer right at the end of a cycle. The world had the empty feeling of a place between hours. The soda machine light made a pale panel on the concrete. I walked to the alcove because something in me believed that going toward the problem would give me back control. My bare feet picked up grit. The fan in the wall of my room hummed at my back like a person talking me through it. The alcove felt colder in a way that had to be the machine, and also felt like more. The out of ice sorry sign swung once on its string and made a small paper sound. The ice machine's door, the one where the scoop lives, hung slightly open, like someone had left a cabinet for me to notice. The scoop handle pointed out a finger. Inside, the bin was wet and empty except for a scatter of half-moons melting into a shallow puddle. On the floor by the machine sat a clear plastic liner bag, like the kind you put in ice buckets. It had the motel's name printed in blue. The bag was empty. It breathed a little in the draft from the machine. It made the smallest sound the way a plastic bag does. The sound went in and out of the fan hum, in and out of the air. In the reflection on the soda machine's glass, I saw myself, and behind me the walkway. I also saw the shape of a person near my door, as if someone was standing very close to it, looking down, head turned a little to listen. I turned around fast. The walkway was empty. The strip of light under my door looked like A cut. The air conditioner kept humming. The room 2 doors down did not make any sound I could identify as people or TV. The night felt big and also tight at the same time, which is not a thing you can explain to someone who has not felt it. I told myself to go back in. I took 1 step. The soda machine behind me chirped and displayed a price and then zeros as if a coin had hit the slot, except I had not put one in. I took another step. The ice machine door closed with a small hinge sound and then opened again by itself like a breath when you are trying to be quiet. The bag moved a little. The scoop handle pointed past me toward the walkway, toward my room. Unwind. You need ice? The voice came from a distance that was not far and not near. It came from the alcove, or from the walkway, or from the mouth of the vending machine. It sounded like the hallway. It sounded like the inside of the soda machine, reciting someone else's words. It was not a whisper. It was not a normal tone. It was like hearing a recording on a cheap speaker. It pulled at my hearing the way certain pitches do. "I'm good," I said, "because that is what you say to a person trying to sell you a thing when you are not good." The fan in my room hummed on and steadied me. I stepped faster toward my door. The bent key lay on my nightstand just inside. I could see the edge of the plastic tag through the slit in the curtain. I put my hand on the knob. It would not turn. It sticks, I thought. It has stuck all day. It did not stick earlier, but I told that to myself anyway because I needed a reason that was not another thing. I jiggled. I kept my voice level. "Come on," I said to a doorknob. The soda machine beeped again. The ice machine knocked once. Dry, like a throat that cannot swallow. The person 2 doors down opened their door a crack and then closed it again, the way people do when they hear something and decide it is not theirs. I did not blame them. "You left your key," the voice said again, softer, near the level of my knees. The plastic bag at the alcove mouth lay on its side now, folded like a pillow. The word ice on it made a little joke with the blue letters. The bent key on my nightstand glinted again in the slit. If I could not get the knob to turn, I would go to the office. I would stand under the camera the way the rule said. I would bang on the glass and wake the man who says rules and let him see me behind his fan hum and take care of me even if I had embarrassed myself by going out after midnight. I took 2 steps toward the office, away from my own door. Something made a soft sound behind me that was not a step and not a breath. It was a sound like a hand sliding down a door. It kept going after it should have stopped. I did not turn to see it. I walked faster. The parking lot at the middle row had the camera hanging above it like a half moon. My car sat, where I had left it, under the tree, not under the camera. The rule felt like a fence I had stepped over without looking. I went to my car because I did not love the walk back up the row away from the camera and toward my room and the bag and the voice that used the shape of a question. The driver's door opened with a familiar click. The seat belt buckle burned my fingers. Heat lived in the fabric, and I yanked my hand away and then took it again because pain is better than what I was feeling. I put the key in the ignition. The engine coughed and caught. The fan in the car blew hot, then less hot, then cooler. The hum made me feel like I belonged to a different machine now. I drove the car up to the middle row and parked under the camera. I did it slow and straight the way a person does when a police car is nearby. I looked once at the office, at the blank window and the sign that said, "No vacancy," which had been flipped while I was in my room. I looked once at the alcove. The plastic bag was gone. The ice machine door was closed. The soda machine had a reflection of me in it that did not look like me because the glass was dirty. I turned off the engine. I sat there and told myself the facts. I was tired. Machines make noises. People sometimes stand in front of other people's doors and do not mean harm. I had broken a rule. I could follow the other rules now. I could go back in and lock my door and put a chair under the knob like a person in a movie who underestimates how strong a chair is. The walk back felt longer than the walk out. I kept the keys in my hand. I kept my eyes on my door and not on anything that might be not my door. I went in. The knob turned easily this time, like it had been waiting to be nice. I locked the door. I set the bent key on the nightstand and covered it with the little key sleeve with room 12 on it like a blanket. I put the chair under the knob anyway. The fan in the wall purred and I let the sound hold me up. I lay down on the bed and kept my shoes on. I set my phone on my chest so I would feel it buzz. I watched the red numbers get closer to 2. Twice the ice machine knocked once, dry. Once the soda machine hiccuped and dropped a can somewhere else in the building. The room phone did not ring again. No one knocked. Around 3, I slept in the way that is not really sleep. At first light, I was up with that kind of clean fear that makes you fast. I packed in 5 minutes with no extra movements. I put the bent key in its sleeve. I opened the door to look, and then stepped out when I saw that the walkway was empty and the air had the faint smell of warm dust that comes only at dawn. The plastic bag was not on my mat. The concrete around the alcove was clean. There was no wet line. I went to the office. The manager was awake and looked like he had never been asleep. He slid the little metal tray open. "Checking out," I said. He took the key. He counted the rules again for me as if reading off a script. Park under the camera. No vending after midnight. If the ice machine runs dry, stay in your room. He wrote something on a pad of paper and tore it off. "Quiet hours are posted," he said, and slid me the slip. On it was a time, 2:11 a.m. Next to it was noise near vending. He did not accuse me. He did not apologize either. He looked through me to the parking lot, which was bright already. "I was in my room," I said. He nodded in a way that accepted and did not accept. "Have a safe drive," he said. His fan hummed. I thought of asking him about the phone calls. I did not. I left. I drove for a while with the radio off. The warm metal of the seatbelt touched my collarbone. The car fan settled into a noise that let my mind sit down for a moment. I drank a bottle of water I had had in my bag from earlier in the day and laughed once at myself because I could have done that in the night. The sun got higher. I did not stop until the highway turned into a slow stream of commuters near the city. At my apartment, I carried my bag in and set it on the kitchen floor. I opened the zipper to pull out a shirt and my phone charger. On top of everything sat a clear plastic bag, like the liners they put in ice buckets. It had the motel name in blue, the same typeface, the same letters. The bag was dry. Inside the bag was the white plastic key sleeve with room 12 in blue ink. The bent key was not in it. The bottom of the bag smelled like bleach and something cold that could not be there. I do not know how the bag got into my luggage. I did not put it there. I did not take an ice bucket. I did not carry a bag down the walkway. I had had my hands on my keys and on the doorknob, and that was enough. I put the plastic bag in the trash and then took it back out, because throwing it away felt like I was throwing a thing at myself. I washed my hands, because that is what you do when you do not know what else to do. The fan over my stove hummed the same pitch as the office fan and the wall unit and the soda machine. The sound made a line through the last day and tied it to right now. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder I had set a week ago popped up and made me jump out of my skin. It said, "Pay power bill." I laughed, then I cried for 1 minute with my face in my hands, not in a dramatic way, just to release something. That night I slept with a chair under my apartment door like a joke that is not funny. At around 3:17 a.m., my refrigerator made a sound as if someone had used the ice dispenser, which my old fridge does not have. It was a small plastic shoot noise, a knock, a breath. I told myself the thermostat clicked and the freezer expanded. I told myself the air in my building shifts. I told myself a lot of things quietly so I would not wake myself up anymore. In the morning, when I opened the freezer to get ice for my coffee, a clear plastic liner bag lay folded over the top of the frozen peas. It had no blue letters. It had the same feel. On my counter beside the bag sat the white plastic key sleeve. Inside it, something heavy made a soft sound when I picked it up. The bent key was back. The metal felt warm like someone had been holding it. The plastic tag with 12 swung and came to rest. pointing at my front door. I do not use vending machines after midnight now. I park where the camera can see me even when it makes my walk longer. And when a machine I do not control runs dry and the hum in a room drops out like a breath caught in a throat, I stay where I am and let the night pass by me. If you ever stop at a place with a strip of rooms and an ice alcove that smells like bleach and cold, remember the rules. They are not for the motel. They are for you. And if you hear a voice ask if you need ice, tell it you brought your own and keep your hands off the handle. Story number 3. The third whistle. I signed on as a last-minute counselor because the camp needed bodies, and I needed a week where my brain could be tired from simple things. Swim check. Sunscreen. Lights out. The kind of tired that feels clean. The drive up wound through pines and dry fields that smelled like warm sap. Cicadas pressed a steady pulse into the afternoon so thick it felt like a fan you could hear. The lake sat low from a hot summer, ringed with a pale band of rock like the mark a ring leaves when you take it off. At check-in they handed me a clipboard and a lanyard with a silver whistle. The whistle was scuffed on one edge, like somebody had gnawed it in a nervous minute. I rubbed my thumb over the flat spot and felt the nick. The camp director, a broad-shouldered man with a one-note voice, did the rules speech from muscle memory while I signed. Lights out means doors locked. He said, no exceptions. 2, do not follow whistles after lights out. If you need me at night, you use the radio, not your ears. 3, count bunks before sleep and again at first light. Never assume. We don't lose kids because we counted in our eerie heads. He tapped each rule printed on the cabin wall chart as if that made them stronger. Someone had hung the rules at an angle and corrected it with a strip of tape, so they looked straight until you looked close. The office fan ticked when its blade hit something, then kept spinning. I wrote my name next to Cabin 7 and took a ring of keys. When the director dropped the keys into my palm, it felt like I'd been handed trust I had not earned. Cabin 7 was a long room with 2 rows of bunks and a small window by the door that showed a slice of the path. 8 boys, all legs and elbows, arrived with duffels and instant friendships. They called me by my first name within an hour and then forgot it 2 minutes later when a dragonfly landed on someone's hat. I learned theirs the way you learn songs. Outline first, details later. Sam, Eli, Mark, Jude, Owen, Mateo, Tyler, Evan. I wrote them on my wrist with a ballpoint and looked when I forgot. Day 1 went how summer days go. We lined up for swim. Bands. Someone cried about a splinter and then told everyone about it like a trophy. Lunch tasted like ketchup and sun. I blew the silver whistle once during free swim to stop a game that was climbing toward bad decisions. And the sound shocked me with how clean it cut the noise. The nick on the mouthpiece pressed against my lip like a little tooth. After dinner we did the long walk back from the fire ring with pockets full of marshmallow dust and a chorus of, "Did you hear that?" every time a twig snapped. I had the head count rhythm by then. I said their names, watched 8 hands go up, and counted bunks when they flopped into them. The cabin smelled like damp towels and cedar hooks and boys trying to pretend they were not tired. I killed the overhead lights at 9:30 p.m., left the little window fan running, and set the lanyard on the nail by the door so I wouldn't sleep on it. Cicadas went on with their endless electric saw. Somewhere down toward the lake, a bullfrog punched the same note over and over. I locked the door and tugged it once to feel the bolt bite. Then I tied a short length of twine from the latch to the handle, a dumb trick a senior counselor had shown me, so I would know if anyone tried the door in the night and I was half asleep. The boys did the whisper-giggle-whisper thing that always happens exactly 10 minutes after lights out and then dropped by 2s and 3s. I sat on the little chair by the door and listened to the fan and the lake and the insects. I counted bunks again by the shape of blankets. 8, I breathed, and let the day fall off me. The first whistle came when the cicadas went quiet all at once. It was not loud. It was neat, like a line drawn with a ruler. 1 note. It came from down the path. Not far, not close. Some camps use 1 whistle for staff sweep. Some don't. Ours used radios. The director had said, no whistles after. Lights out. I told myself a counselor at another cabin was being old school or funny. I did not stand up. I did not look through the window. The cicadas started again, as if someone turned a dial. The fan clicked as it hit its tick and kept spinning. The boys breathed the way boys breathe in sleep, long in, longer out. I let my shoulders settle away from my ears. Then the second whistle came, a little higher or a little farther. 2 notes. The sound touched the metal of the door and handed a cool line into the room. I looked at the nail by the door where my whistle hung and saw it swing. Just once and be still. I told myself that was the fan's light draft fooling me. I told myself a lot of little things like that because they help. I sent a text out of habit to the night lead, even though I had already learned that service dipped low in the pines. Hearing whistles near 7, everyone down, the little. Sending bar crawled and stalled. A minute later, the message put a gray exclamation mark on itself and asked if I wanted to try again. I didn't. I kept the radio on the chair arm, volume turned down so static wouldn't set anyone twitching. I listened. The path light beyond the window hummed. Then the third whistle came. 3 notes, each a hair longer than the last. Not playful, not urgent, something like patient. The rules in the office had made the third whistle sound like a joke someone had turned into a habit, the way rules sometimes are. Hearing it at night with 8 kids breathing behind me was not a joke. I felt my neck go hot. I could picture the director with his broad shoulders tapping the rule on the wall with 2 fingers. Do not follow whistles after lights out. Use the radio. Do not follow your ears. I slid forward on the chair and looked through the window slit. The path light threw a crooked egg of pale on the packed dirt and ate the rest of the dark. Nothing moved. A moth the size of a thumb batted the glass and left a powdery kiss. In the space beyond the light, where the trail turned toward the flagpole, the dark had texture like wet felt. I waited. The cicadas built back up. My eyes made shapes and unmade them. Behind me, bunk springs creaked. I turned. One of the boys, Evan, whose hair flopped into his eyes, shifted and pushed his blanket down. He sucked air between his teeth like he did in the lake when the water was colder than he predicted. He settled. I counted the shapes again. 8. The air in the cabin held the day's heat even with the window fan. It smelled like sweat that was not yet sour and the sweet, plasticky note of a stick of deodorant a kid had tried for the thrill. I did not go outside. That was the choice the rule asked me to make, so I made it. I stayed where I was with my hand on the radio and my eyes on the slit window and my ears on the insects. The clock on my wrist, an old analog with tiny white hands, ticked toward 10. I let each minute be a thing I could finish. A while later, the fan pitch dipped and came back. The path light hummed and clicked and got a shade brighter. I breathed. In the far bunk, a boy's foot slid down to the ladder rung and thumped once, the way a sleeping foot does. I whispered his name, and the foot tucked back. Then something that had not been wrong a second earlier went wrong in a small way. The whistle on the nail was no longer on the nail. It lay on the floor by the door, mouthpiece toward the crack. Lanyard pooled like a snake that had given up. I had not heard it fall. The nail didn't sit above the door where a vibration could have jogged it. It was on the hinge side. I stood without making the chair squeal and picked the whistle up. It was colder than the room by several degrees. I rubbed my thumb over the nick and it felt deeper. I hung it back and the lanyard did not swing at all. I told myself I had knocked the nail earlier without noticing. Then I tied the lanyard in a loose knot around the nail so it would take a tug to come off. I sat down again and made a new plan, in my head. If the door latch moved, I would call on the radio. If a kid sat up and said a name that was not a boy in our cabin, I would flip the big light and take my chances with tears. If the third whistle came again, I would do nothing. That was the rule, do nothing. I must have dozed in the thin way that makes a minute feel like a half hour. I woke because the room got heavier. The way you notice it is that the fan still spins, and yet the air is not moving anymore. The cicadas cut off as if a hand pressed down. The bullfrog missed his note. In the kind of silence that feels like pressure, I heard feet on the path. Not hurrying, not sneaking, just walking like a person who knows where their feet go. The footsteps stopped outside our door. The twine I had tied to the latch gave a soft pull and then relaxed, like someone had leaned a shoulder against the wood and breathed out. "Evan," a voice said through the door. A man's voice. Calm. The kind of calm that says, "I am in charge." "Evan, you up?" Every muscle I have put itself in a line. I did not speak. The bed springs behind me answered instead. Evan sat up and swung his legs off and stood the way sleepwalkers stand, as if gravity hinged somewhere else. He moved toward me, not fast, not sneaky, just moving. I put my hand out chest high, and he stopped like I had put a wall there. "Buddy," I whispered. "Bathroom's this way." I pointed toward the back where the little hand sink lived. I wanted to break the line between him and the door. My whisper had the wrong sound. It had the sound you use on a dog that is about to bolt. Evan did not look at me. He looked at the slit of light under the door and listened like the door spoke a language I did not know. 3 whistle notes touched the wood. Soft, close. The kind of quiet counts you would do for a kid at the shallow end to time dunking his head. The radio on the chair gave a single, quick thread of static and quit. I reached for it, and it felt like reaching into glue. I could not get my hand there, fast enough to matter. Do not follow whistles after lights out. The rule was a rope again. My job was to hold it, but I had 8 boys, and one of them was standing up listening to a man outside at what felt like the wrong end of midnight. I counted bunks to buy time. 7 full bodies. The 8th at my hand. That felt like math I could live with. I whispered, the director's name into the radio anyway, mouth too close, words too soft. Evan took a step. I put my palm on his shoulder and felt how his skin was cool and damp as if he had just come out of the lake. It left a chill spot on my hand that did not go away. "Evan," the voice said again, the way someone says a kid's name when the kid has something that belongs to the adult. Not mean, not sweet. I got the picture in my mind so fast I didn't have time to decide whether it came from sense or fear. The picture was of a man in the pathlight wearing a counselor's lanyard, pointing at his own whistle and then at mine as if we had a trade to finish. I whispered, "Back to bed," to Evan and put a hand on his back. He took another step, toward the door like my hand was attached to him by string and the string was tangled. The twine on the latch lifted and set back down. I thought of undoing the knot on the lanyard and putting the whistle in my pocket like a charm. I thought of calling out, "Who is it?" in a voice with shoulders. I did neither. I did something else instead. I broke a rule. I cracked the door to look. It was not brave. It was a bad idea that felt like the next breath. I slid the chain high and opened the door the width of 2 fingers and let a straight piece of the path light cut the dark at my feet. Outside, nobody stood on the step. The light made hard shadows of the pine needles. Farther down, where the path curved toward the flagpole, someone stood just beyond the spill, turned half away. A counselor by the look of it. Tall, shoulders a familiar shape under a staff shirt, a lanyard line dark against his chest. His head cocked like he listened, to a sound I could not hear. He lifted his hand. His fingers tapped a rhythm into the air. 1, 2, 3, whistle with no whistle. I shut the door because I had no business with a thing that knew a rhythm I had only just learned. The twine went slack again against my fingers. Evan reached for the knob. I took his wrist and felt how his pulse matched the cicadas when they were running, only the insects were not running now. I said his name the way the man had said it, calm, and it felt like stealing. He blinked once, and his eyes cleared in a slow way, as if a lid had lifted inside. He looked at me, then at the door, then down at his bare feet like they had taken him farther than he planned. He sucked air between his teeth. He went back to his bunk without me telling him to. I tucked the blanket around his legs because I needed to do something with my hands that made sense. 3 notes sounded again, but from the other direction, down by the lake, farther off. 3 short, measured notes. A pause. 3 again. Stretched. 1 hair longer. The cicadas kicked on. Exactly then, as if a switch had been flipped, and the bullfrog hit his note like he had been holding it in his throat. The fan woke up and pushed air through the window with a soft shoulder. I counted bunks for a 3rd time. 8. I sat in the chair and watched the slit of window until the path went a shade darker before the dawn. At first light, I walked the boys to the bathhouse and stood there while 8 sets of teeth got brushed, with the speed and quality you get when you make a game out of it. On the way back, I saw marks at the bend in the path where the light had not reached. A set of prints that started and stopped like someone had stood there and turned and took 3 steps and disappeared into a place prints do not keep shape. I knelt. The dirt was scuffed like somebody had dragged a toe. In the dust, you could make out a ring circle the size of my whistle's mouthpiece pressed twice side by side, like someone had tapped it impatiently against their palm. When the director came by on rounds, I told him what I had heard. I left out the part where I cracked the door. He looked at the rules chart as if it might have failed him. He listened like he had decided to listen before I spoke. When I finished, he shook his head once like a man trying to dislodge a fly. "We don't use whistles at night," he said. "Not for a long time. We used to, years back. There was an incident. Confusion. We stopped. If you hear one, it's not us. Keep your radio close. Count your bunks. Do not follow sounds. Day staff will check the paths. You focus on your cabin." His voice did not change when he said, "incident." His jaw did. The day was so ordinary after that it almost made me angry. We did archery. A kid's arrow made a wild left and thunked into a bale. We ate orange slices and got sticky and rinsed our hands in a hose that ran rusty for a second and then clear. The sun hauled itself from one side of the pines to the other and lost none of its heat. At rest hour, 3 of the boys learned a card game badly and laughed anyway. A counselor across the field fell asleep in a camp chair and woke with the lanyard line printed on his cheek. I kept my whistle on, mouthpiece down, the nick against my collarbone like a cold eye. At lights out that night, I tied the twine again and checked the bolt twice. I counted the bunks and the breaths. I hung the whistle on the nail and tied the loose knot. I told myself I would do nothing no matter what. If a kid sat up, I would put him back down. If 3 notes came, I would let them die on the door. If someone said a name through the wood in a voice that sounded like me, I would put my own name in my mouth and hold it there so I would not lend it. That was the plan. I sat in the chair and kept the radio on my thigh. It went differently. They always do on the second night. The first whistle did not come from the path. It came from the back of the cabin, from the trees where there was no trail. 1 note, so thin I could have believed it was a bird, except birds do not know the line you can draw with a breath and metal. The cicadas did not stop this time. They swelled. The second whistle stepped in from the side, by the bathhouse. 2 notes that set the hair on my arms a different way than a breeze does. Evan turned over in his bunk and put his face to the wall. Mateo said something in a language that was not mine and pulled his blanket to his ears like he was annoyed with a brother. I stood and put my hand on the lanyard knot. The whistle felt like a piece of night that had hardened into metal. The third whistle did not blow. It clicked. The click of a metal tongue against teeth. It came from just outside the window, just below the screen, as if someone crouched with their head tilted up and their mouth lined with my mouth. 3 little clicks. A pause. 3 again. I put my hand on the radio and did not call because I could not trust my voice to be made of one piece. The twine on the latch lifted a width of a finger and set down. It did it again and then held, the way a string holds when a child wraps it, around a doorknob and leans. I stood and was nothing but hands for a second. I undid the knot and took the whistle from the nail and put it in my pocket. It made the pocket feel colder, as if metal can teach fabric new tricks. I reached for the bolt. I did not undo it. I stood there and let the radio weigh my other palm down. Someone knocked. Not light, not heavy. 3 times. A polite knock with bad timing. I leaned close to the door without letting my forehead touch, because I did not want anything on the outside to feel the tap from my skin. I listened. Beyond the door, under the hum of the path light and the insect saw, I heard a small sound like a marble dropped once into a metal cup. My own whistle was in my pocket. I had just felt it. "Count," the voice said. A man's voice. Not the director. Not anyone I had spoken to. The word came through the door hard enough to feel. "Count bunks." It lifted into a tone you use when you talk through teeth. Now, I counted because the rule told me to, and because the voice scared me, and because counting is a way to keep hold of yourself. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I did not want to say 8. I made myself say 8. I said it twice. Evan rolled over and put his hand under his cheek. I pressed the radio button and made my words steady. 7 secure, I lied, into the mic. 8th restless, no outside contact, please advise. The radio came back right away with the night lead's whisper yell that carries through static. Stay put. Copy? Stay put. We're coming to you. 3 whistles from the back, 3 from the side, 3 from down toward the lake. Not loud, not urgent, patient. I had the feeling you get when you realize you are not the only person counting. The door handle turned a hair within the play of the bolt and then let go. The twine was still and useless. I wished it had weight enough to mean something. I stepped back and put my shoulder to the frame as if that made the wood thicker. I could feel the boys' breaths like a weather change. The cicadas stopped. The bullfrog missed. The air pressed. The knock that came then was not polite. It didn't care about me. It cared about the rule. It was 3 knocks you could not mistake for anything else. The radio ticked like a watch. I stood my ground because sometimes that is all the choice you get. Footsteps moved away down the path. 3 whistles answered from the flagpole. I pictured the lanyard man standing with his head tipped, listening to a line of time I could not see, tapping his fingers into air. The night lid and 2 staffers hustled up the path with their flashlights bouncing and their bodies throwing choppy shadows. The path light made their legs look wrong for a second. They reached my step and saw my face and did the posture you do when you think you will have to force a door and then you don't. "You good?" the night lead said. He had sleep in his voice and adrenaline in his hands. I nodded because my mouth was good for nothing. He looked past me into the bunks and counted like a man who had learned the lesson. He got to 8 and let the count land, with a breath. He checked the latch and the bolt and the hinge, because that is what you do when you cannot fix the thing that is not broken. He listened. Hard. We all did. The night had nothing simple left to say. We walked the bend together with our lights tight into the ground so we did not give the tree line too much to throw back at us. At the curve where the prints had been, the dirt was smooth, like a hand, had wiped a slate clean. At the flagpole, the rope's metal clip knocked the pole twice without wind. Beyond, the lake made its slow breath-in, breath-out noise against the stones. Out there, a red channel marker winked its lazy eye with the same number of seconds between blinks it had always had. The night lead scanned the shoreline and the dock and the line of reeds. Nothing. No one. He put a hand on my shoulder and left it there a second longer than you would for comfort, and a second shorter than you would for pity. "Radio next time," he said. "Even if it's nothing. Especially if it's nothing." He walked me back to the cabin and waited while I relocked the door. He lifted his light so it drew a pale square on the wall chart and the crooked rules taped straight. He looked at the nail by the door. "Where's your whistle?" he said. "In my pocket," I said. I pulled it out because I wanted to wait, in my hand where I could see it. The metal was warm now. The nick looked deeper. I put it on the nail and tightened the knot again with a shake in my fingers I did not want him to notice. He noticed. He nodded like a man nods when he has nothing smart to add. We got through the rest of the week on the kind of routine that makes kids feel safe. Swim, sunscreen, tie-dye, stick rockets. I kept the radio near and the whistle on the nail in daylight. and on my collar at dusk, and in my pocket at night. I never heard the 3 notes again while we were there. The cicadas played us out in the afternoons until the sky went to peach, and then to a blue so dark it looked like an argument. The boys went home with bracelets and stories that made them braver in the telling. On the last morning, I counted bunks one more time at dawn, because I had promised to. 8. I locked the door and handed my keys in and dropped the lanyard on the director's desk with a little clink. The whistle looked small there, he said, thanks in his one-note voice. He did not ask how I slept. Back in my apartment, the city heat had a different taste. Asphalt, not pine. My walls made the familiar tick noises they make when air changes temperature, and for once they did not charm me. I put my laundry in the machine and sat on the floor and let the quiet be a good thing. I took a shower where nobody might knock to ask about bug spray. I made a sandwich and ate it over the sink because the crumbs then take care of themselves. At 3:17 a.m., I know, because I looked, my phone woke and made a sound I had not heard from it before. Not a ring, not an alarm. 3 thin, notes too clean to be a glitch speaker. I sat up in the dark like I had been pulled with a string. The screen showed a voice memo I had not made. The title was the timestamp. The length was 3 seconds. I did not press play. I did not have to. I knew what it would be. I got up. I told myself I was getting a glass of water. I told myself I was a person who could cross a kitchen without becoming a different person. On the counter, near my fruit bowl, lay a silver whistle I did not bring home. It had a nick on the mouthpiece the size of a small tooth. When I put my thumb there, it fit like a thing made for me. I put the whistle in a drawer with rubber bands and a dead pen and closed the drawer and put my palm on it until the warmth from my skin made the wood feel alive. I stood there and listened to my building breathe, and to the fridge knock the way freezers knock when they shift, and to the soft far traffic that sounds like water if you soften your ears. The drawer did not rattle. The phone on the table did not play anything. I went back to bed and lay on my back and counted the beats between the radiator's clicks as if they were bunks. When dawn came late, I slept hard for 1 hour and woke with the taste of lake air in my mouth like pennies and green. I went to the drawer in the bright morning because things that won't let you alone at night often look smaller in daylight. I slid it open. The whistle sat where I left it, bright and tidy. The nick was a little deeper. The lanyard was not. There. I closed the drawer and leaned my forehead on it, and laughed once because sometimes you laugh when you are done being scared, but not done being careful. I keep my own rules now. Lights out means doors locked. I count what's mine before. Sleep, and again the next morning. When someone tries to get me to follow a sound at the wrong time, I stay where I am and let it look for someone else. Most nights, nothing happens and the city makes its normal noises, and I am boring on purpose. Once in a while, when the evening gets the color it had over the lake and the fan line hums the same pitch as the cicadas I can hear even here, I take the whistle out of the drawer and put it on the counter, mouthpiece down, and tell myself it is just an object. I tell myself a lot of simple things that help. Sometimes, in the hour before dawn, the whistle is not on the counter anymore. I find it on the doormat, pointing at the door like an arrow, and every so often, from the hall, or the stairwell, or nowhere. At all I hear 3 neat notes, each one a hair longer than the last, and I count to 8 and do not answer. Story number 4. Low Tide Window. I rented the beach condo for 2 quiet weeknights because it was cheaper midweek, and I needed a place where the noise in my head could dissolve into waves. It was one of those narrow buildings that face the water with a lot of glass, a thin balcony, and tile floors that remember sand. The key was in a lockbox. The air conditioner clicked on like it had opinions. I carried in a bag of groceries, a laptop, and a paper novel I pretended I would read on. The fridge. The host had taped 3 rules in big, clean type. Close the curtains at low tide. Do not go out on the balcony after 10 at night. Never photograph the dark water. I smiled because they were weirdly specific in a way that sounded like a story the host didn't want to repeat in the listing. My skin tasted like salt as soon as I licked my lip. I hadn't touched the water yet. The smell got in anyway. I set the bag down, opened the slider for air, and let the sound roll in. A gull scolded. The evening had that tired gold light that makes everything kind. I'm not a superstitious person. I like rules that explain themselves. These didn't. I checked the tide app on my phone and saw low tide would hit close to sunset. I told myself I'd close the curtains then, mostly because I didn't want to be the person who breaks house rules on night one. I walked the place. Small kitchen, couch that wanted a throw blanket, a narrow hallway to a bedroom where the ocean filled the window like a movie. In the nightstand I found an old instant camera, square and white, the kind that spits credit card photos. Under it lay a single Polaroid face down, the back dusted with grit as if someone had set it on a deck rail. I didn't flip it. I just put the camera back and wiped my fingers on my shorts and told myself I'd been a little nosy. I made pasta. I stood by the slider to eat and watched the water pull away from the shore like a big animal exhaling. The exposed sand went a shade darker. Little pools formed and held the sky. The air came in cool and then warm like it couldn't decide, and the taste of salt hit my tongue again for no reason. Salt on my skin without the swim. It felt like a trick light plays. When the tide line got thin and the pools were mirrors, I remembered the rule. I reached up and pulled the curtains across the glass. The fabric made that soft clack against its track and took the room from big to safe in one hand. I left a 2-finger gap because I'm human, and I like a sliver of outside even when I say I don't. I put dishes in the sink. I answered one email that didn't need an answer. The air conditioner settled into a hum that sounded like sleep. The first odd thing was small enough to ignore. In the gap in the curtains, something that should have been my reflection wasn't quite. The glass at low tide made a better mirror than glass should, and I could see the room in it with the couch and the lamp and the shape of me. But when I leaned to the left to test it, the me in the glass didn't match for half a second. It was like a video call with bad lag. I told myself that's what it was. Lag. A trick of the eye. I closed the gap with 2 fingers and laughed at myself for even testing it. Shower, then a movie. I didn't feel like the beach in the dark, and the balcony rule after 10 made a good excuse. When I got out of the shower and toweled my hair, the smell of sunscreen rose in the bathroom like someone else had used it there yesterday and set the bottle down without a cap. My skin tasted like salt again. That made sense now. Steam brings things out. I brushed my teeth. I told myself to relax. Around 9, I pulled the curtains a quarter open because the sky over the water goes ridiculous at that hour. The tide was still low. The exposed skin of the beach shone. Pools held torn pieces of sunset in neat rectangles, like mirrors you could pick up and pocket. In the glass, the room doubled. I watched myself watch myself. I don't usually play with reflections. It makes me feel 12. But I stepped closer anyway and lifted my hand to see the other hand lift and made a face and told myself to stop. That's when I heard the slider breathe. You know the sound a heavy door makes when air pressure changes on one side? That small, tired sigh through the track. It did that once, then again. The lock was set. I tested it. The bar in the track sat exactly where the host had left it. I told myself, air conditioners push and pull. The building moves. The tile under my feet held coolness like a quiet answer. I decided to look at the Polaroid because not looking felt worse. I went down the hall and pulled the drawer. The camera sat where I put it. The single photo lay underneath. I flipped it over. The image had the view from this exact room at low tide. Same curtains half open, same narrow balcony rail. The water in the picture didn't show waves. It showed a flat black surface like glass at night. In the reflection on that black, the room had a figure at the glass with its hand on the door. If that's me, I thought, where's the camera? The angle didn't work. It wasn't a selfie. It wasn't taken from inside unless someone stood where the couch is and aimed past me at the dark water and caught my reflection. Except the hand on the door in the picture wore a ring I don't wear and had a little crescent moon scar I don't have. I set the photo down face down and told myself it was a prop the host used to make the rules feel cute and spooky. Some hosts do a theme. The balcony rule ticked in my head when I checked the time. 9:42 p.m. I had 18 minutes to indulge one look. I stepped out with bare feet and leaned on the rail like an idiot in a postcard. The air had a damp metal smell. The ocean moved like a big sleeping thing. From this angle, the pools on the sand caught bits of condo light and held them steady. The sky's last color ran away. Below me, a couple walked where the water had been. Their voices were low and happy. The woman's laugh stepped on its own echo and kept going. For 2 seconds, the world felt normal. A phone flash popped somewhere down the beach and made white squares on the sand. I almost lifted my phone, then read Rule 3 in my head. Never photograph the dark water. I'm not superstitious, but I didn't want to be the punchline in a host story about idiots, so I didn't. I went back in before 10 and closed the slider and set the lock and dropped the bar into the track and shut the curtains and told myself, good job, you followed all the rules. I fell asleep on the couch with the movie still talking, because that's exactly what couches and movies do to people alone at the beach. At some point after midnight, the air changed. The room got flat. The hum in the air conditioner fell by 1 note and stayed there. I woke because a quiet tapping came from the glass. Not knocking. Tapping. Like someone using 2 fingernails, then pausing, then 1 fingernail near the track. The taste of salt filled my mouth in a way that didn't feel like air at all. Salt on my skin, but from the inside this time. I sat up and kept my body still the way you do when you think sound is hunting motion. The tapping came again. I told myself it was a loose blind cord, except I had shut the curtains and they didn't have cords. I told myself it was grit in the track shifting as the building moved. I told myself a lot of small things in a row. I stood anyway. I put my palm lightly to the curtain. It was cold by the glass, just cool enough to make nerve endings sit up. I pulled the curtain 2 fingers and looked. The water wasn't black now. It was that weird, full moon gray even though I couldn't see the moon. The pools on the sand showed pieces of the building. In the slider glass, my room doubled. The me in the reflection had my hair wrong. Not scary wrong, just parted the other way. I reached up to smooth my hair without thinking. The other hand didn't follow. My stomach dropped in that gentle way that feels like a down elevator. I let the curtain fall back into place and breathed. On purpose. I did not open the slider. I did nothing. That was a choice. It counts. The tap came 1 more time, then a scrape like something wet being moved an inch across smooth tile. The bar in the track made a tiny chatter like it wanted to rise and couldn't. I whispered, "No," to the room, which is a dumb habit, and the room didn't answer. I slept a thin, uneven sleep and dreamed stupid, literal dreams. In one I was told to count waves and they kept starting over. In another I wiped a mirror and someone else's mouth showed up where mine should be. I woke before dawn with the taste of salt again and a small fear that felt like a task I could do. I showered in bright light to cut the night. I packed my laptop even though I wasn't leaving yet. I made coffee. When the sun came up, the place felt friendly again. I opened the curtains all the way. I slid the door and stood on the balcony with my mug and let the air move past me. The tide had turned. Water crept back over the pools, breaking their little mirrors. A man jogged by with a dog that didn't love the waves. The dog skipped sideways at each reach of foam like a kid. I made a rule for myself on top of the hosts. Only balcony in daylight. Only admiration of the water when there are other people to make me reasonable. I worked a few hours at the table. The ocean tuned itself to ignore me volume. By noon, the world was silly with people, and I ate a sandwich and watched a boy in red shorts dig a moat around his castle and fail happily. In mid-afternoon, a woman 2 balconies down leaned out to take a photo of the horizon. I caught myself wanting to tell her, "Not the dark water," and laughed because it was bright midday. I had let a fridge paper colonize my brain. Low tide. That evening came later. I set an alarm at 8:45 p.m. to remind myself to close the curtains. When the phone chirped, I did it. Fabric clacked. The room got small and kind. I left a small gap anyway, because I'm still human. I sat on the couch with the dumb novel and pretended I was reading. The instant camera in the drawer felt heavy in my thoughts in the way objects get when you give them a job they didn't ask for. I went and looked at it again without touching the photo. I told myself other people have weird little house quirks, and this is no different than a rule about not using the fireplace or not feeding the gulls. At 9:15 p.m., the power blinked. Just a blink. A hiccup. The air conditioner dropped out and came back. The slider sighed in its track like the building had exhaled. A soft bump touched the glass, like someone had pushed a forehead to it, and then leaned away. I kept my hands in my lap. My voice would have sounded wrong, so I didn't try it. I heard a small camera noise from the hallway. A chirp, a motor that only has one job. I knew it from the shape of it. The instant camera had just spit a photo. I wanted to stay in my seat. That would have been smarter if smart means safe. I got up. That was my point of no return, and I walked right past it, because sometimes doing the brave thing is just doing the wrong thing with your mouth shut. I went to the drawer. The camera sat where I left it, front light off. A fresh picture lay, face down on the wood. The back was wet with a thin grit, like it had been set for a second on a rail that held sand. I didn't flip it. I left it there to develop or not develop on its own. I don't know why I thought it could develop face down in a drawer. Habit. Hope. Stupidity. Back in the living room, the curtain gap looked like a mouth someone had pressed a finger to. I stood beside it, not in front of it, and moved it just enough to make the world a sliver again. The black water in the pools had sharpened into better mirrors as the last light drained. The slider glass made the room into a reflection of the room behind me. I tried to catch the lag. I lifted my hand. The other hand lifted with me, smooth as a trained trick. Then the reflection of the room brightened a little, like someone had turned up a lamp in the other version. The lamp in my room did not change. The couch in the other version had one cushion out of place. Mine didn't. The me in the other version put a hand to the glass and left it there. I didn't. I watched my other hand hold there like it was practicing a touch. On the other side of that touch, low-tide water lay in squares and lines like someone had set mirrors down in a grid. A shape moved through one of the black rectangles with the kind of speed you can get wrong if you stare. It was not a wave. Waves push and run. This made a straight, clean pass like a shadow crossing a stage. The bar in the track chattered again. The lock tried and failed. The slider breathed. Tap, tap. A third, lower tap near the track. I said, "No," stupidly again because I'm not original. I stepped back. The other me did not. It put its forehead to the glass and left a print like a smear you'd see after a party, human and ordinary and wrong. I did a small, cowardly thing that also kept me alive. I went to the bedroom, shut that door, and lay on the bed with the lamp on and my shoes on. I held my phone in both hands like a talisman and opened the Tide app because that felt like owning something. The line on the chart moved slow. When the little dot passed low tide, I told myself the rule's window had closed, and maybe whatever the rule was about would close with it. I fell asleep like someone who had stayed too long at a party and is trying to leave in pieces. Near 3 a.m, a photo sound woke me. Not the phone, the small camera in the hall, one little motor breath and a soft slide as paper met wood. I stayed on the bed and didn't move for 100 counts. Then I got up because not looking keeps you in a story forever. I opened the drawer. The face-down photo from earlier was dry now. Next to it lay the new one, still outgassing its chemical smell. I flipped the dry one first. It showed my balcony rail and the slider with the curtains almost shut. In the reflection on the glass, the other room burned a little brighter than mine, and the other me had its mouth against the glass like people do when they are trying to speak through a window. The hand on the glass had that crescent moon scar. The lamp next to the couch was the wrong lamp. Not wildly wrong, just wrong. Tall when mine was short. Different shade. Familiar in a way that made my stomach squeeze. I flipped the second photo before it finished developing because patience left me. This one was not the condo. It was my apartment window at home. The night view, I know. The numbers on the opposite building. My own thin balcony with its peeling chair. In the glass of that window, something that could have been ocean stood where sky should be. Low tide laid out in black squares. A hand at the glass that wasn't mine. I've never taken a picture like that. I've never seen that view with water in it. The taste of salt flooded my mouth so fast I gagged once and bent with it. I packed before dawn. I put the instant camera back where I found it. I left the 2 Polaroids on the table because taking them felt like stealing, and also like inviting. I cleaned up in a hurry that didn't leave it cleaner. I set the lock in the bar and pulled the curtains and didn't look again. I left the key in the lockbox with hands that didn't want to work. I drove home with the windows cracked too, fingers and the radio off. In my apartment, I set my bag down and went directly to the window like an idiot in a cautionary tale. It was just my city view. Cars. A woman walking a dog that looks like a sofa cushion. A bit of sky. The glass showed my face. My hair parted the way I've always parted it. I laughed in relief and then hated that I laughed. My tongue tasted like salt again for no reason, salt on my skin without sweat. I shut the blinds before 10 because I could. I'm not a superstitious person, but I've collected a few rules. Curtains closed when the tide chart says low, even if the ocean is not near me. No balcony after 10, even if my balcony is a joke. Never photograph the dark when the dark looks too flat. At 3:17 a.m. the next night, my phone buzzed with a notification from Photos. A memory from last night. The thumbnail was a black square with a thin gray line. I did not open it. I deleted the notification and then turned the phone face down like that changes anything. The next morning there was a Polaroid on my kitchen counter that I didn't print. It showed my window again. The reflection showed my living room with one cushion out of place and a taller lamp than I own. The hand on the glass had a crescent moon scar. Sand dusted the edge like the picture had taken a small walk before it found me. The instant camera from the condo sits in my bottom desk drawer now because I told myself I didn't want to leave it for the next guest, and also because I told myself having the object might keep the story in one place. I didn't borrow it. It keeps finding me. The drawer stays shut. The thing wants windows. Fine. It can want them from inside wood. When the tide chart on my phone shows a low somewhere far away, my apartment windows feel cooler for a moment, like someone has leaned on the other side. I keep the curtains closed. I don't take pictures anymore. And when a tiny motor breathes in the night and a paper square slides across wood, I let it finish, and I do not flip it over until morning. The sand-dusted Polaroid waiting there always develops clean, and I never see the ocean where it should not be, until the instant I turn it to the light and my own window starts to look like water. Story number 5. The ferry that doesn't list routes. I went down to the harbor because the heat in town stacked in layers and the water at least pretended to move it around. Summer does that, makes you forgive diesel and gulls and prices that feel like a dare. My plan was small: cross over to the island, walk the loop, eat something fried, watch the last light slide off metal, come back. A plain evening on a cheap ticket. Nothing to explain later. Down by the kiosks, the boards rattled in a lazy wind. The app on my phone said last posted ferry back was at 9:45 p.m., which sounded perfect. The booth had a fan that chopped the air into squares. The clerk inside wore a cap with salt dried into the brim and the kind of expression you get when your job is answering the same question to different people. I said, "1 round trip." He slid a paper ticket under the glass instead of flashing. A QR code. On the back, someone had stamped the harbor's name crooked, ink bleeding like a thumb pressed too hard. 3 things, he said. Quiet. Like we were not buying a ferry and not in public. Board only printed routes. He tapped the schedule board bolted to the wall. Do not take the last bench. He tapped the diagram by the window that showed the deck layout, benches numbered right to left. Ignore the extra horn. What's that mean? I asked, because it felt like a line meant for a story. If you hear it, you will know, he said. Then, like he had said too much, he pushed the ticket a little farther at me with 2 fingers. Gate 2, when the bell goes. Enjoy. Gadiu. Diesel made a thin blue ribbon in the air that tasted silver at the back of my tongue. It's a smell I don't mind in summer. It says somebody else is handling the heavy work. Kids ran along the rail, and parents did the soft voice stop that keeps kids safe without teaching them to be afraid. I put the ticket in my pocket and walked the pier and watched gulls consider crimes. The boards under my feet had that wide-seamed, give that makes you feel like a person on a dock, even if you hate boats. The island is close enough that you can lie to yourself about the ocean. Between here and there are pilings and channel markers and a lazy line of lobster buoys with the paint knocked off. The ferry ride is short. It's a shuttle more than a voyage. That was part of the charm. I wanted something simple that would end where it started. On the island side, I did all the obvious things and pretended they were discoveries. I bought a paper cup of fries that tasted like salt and oil and childhood. I walked the loop past houses with porches you could rent for your soul. I watched a dog sleep in a patch of sun and dream about running. When the sky went to peach and then to bruised blue, I checked the time. Plenty left before the last posted ferry. I headed back to the dock with the slow confidence of a person who is not about to miss a boat. The line for boarding bumped along. A deckhand in a sun-faded vest waved with 2 fingers without looking up. A kid dropped a quarter, and it rolled like it had somewhere to be. The diesel smell climbed and fell with the engines idle. The crowd settled in the way groups do when a plan becomes an action. I looked at benches the way a person looks at chairs before a meeting. Habit. I count places like other people count exits. The last bench at the stern sat empty. Every other bench had at least a bag or a knee claiming it. I thought about the sign at the kiosk, "Do not take the last bench," and felt dumb for remembering it. People sat there every day. It's a bench. A horn sounded from the channel. 1 short, 1 long, the usual. Then a second horn from somewhere behind the breakwater. A thin one, like an older throat. 2 quick notes spaced wrong. Nobody reacted, except an older woman in a blue windbreaker who looked toward the sound and then looked hard at the last bench like it owed her money. The deckhand didn't flinch. The bell at the gate clanged, the line moved, the world stayed ordinary. We pulled out into a slow V through the water, foam curling like pages behind us. The lights on the pier shrank and steadied into a string. The diesel settled into that steady, drumming that lives inside your bones more than in your ears. A boy pressed his forehead to the rail and watched the churn like it could write him a secret. I stayed mid-deck and told myself I would not be cute about rules printed for tourists. Halfway over, I noticed the route was wrong. Not wildly wrong, just enough so the lighthouse was on the wrong shoulder. I know the feel of approaching the harbor like a person knows a hallway in their own house. The boat angled wider, favoring a channel that cut along the back of the old cannery. The cannery windows were black rectangles, and the water beneath them was oil flat. I told myself maybe the pilot was avoiding a sail school or a speedboat. You explain things until you relax. It's a public service you do for your own heart. We slid into a new slice of dark. The diesel smell lifted and returned stronger, like someone had draped it over us. The crowd quieted the way people do when they don't know if they should keep laughing. A horn off to our right answered the slow growl of ours with 2 quick notes, the same thin voice I'd heard by the breakwater. The older woman in the windbreaker shifted forward in her seat so her knees were almost under her chin. She did not look toward the sound this time. She stared at the last bench, still empty, like she was keeping it that way with a look. A deckhand did the walk you do when you're about to tell people a nice lie. He smiled down a row and said something I couldn't hear and pointed toward the bow. He passed me without making eye contact. He set his hand for a second on the empty last bench like a person checking if paint is dry. "I can move," I said to nobody. because saying it relieved the feeling of not knowing how to be useful. The deckhand paused as if he had heard me through the engine noise and the fact that I hadn't said it to him. He shook his head no, the smallest possible motion. His face looked like a man who is trying not to flinch while a camera watches. He kept walking, shoulders easy, and nodded at a person filming the sunset like all evenings were the same shape. We came up on the far harbor like it had been moved 6 inches to the left. The ferry eased between pilings that did not have the new rubber bumpers the rest of the docks wore. The lights looked a half-watt dimmer. It could have been a trick of my eyes. It could have been the way light changes under a low ceiling of cloud. The bell by Gate 2 rang once, and then a second time half a beat off. The thin horn sounded again beyond the pilings, 2 notes and a small breath between them. We tied up. The deckhand flicked a loop of line over a cleat with the ease of somebody who can do it sleeping. He dropped the ramp. The ramp kissed the wood with a sound like a page turning. People stood and made the small, polite noises people make when they decide who goes first. At the top of the ramp, a man in a gray cap took tickets and tore the return stubs the way everyone tears tickets. On ferries, he did not look at faces. He looked at hands. He had a stamp for wrists which felt old. He rolled it once to make sure the ink was ready and then pressed it down on the back of a woman's hand with a soft thud. The stamp mark looked like a little anchor. When he took my ticket, he tore the return but did not hand it back. He held it between 2 fingers, looked at it, then at me. His eyes were the color of old rope. "Return?" he asked. A question that wasn't a question. "Tonight," I said, because that was the plan. He held my eyes a second longer than strangers do. "All crossings are 2-way," he said, like a line from a training manual or a hymn. I could not tell which. He stamped my wrist, and the ink felt cool like water. I stepped onto the dock, and the dock moved under me in the way docks always do, except it moved slow, like it was deciding. People passed through the gate and flowed into a harbor I did not know. It looked the same if you glanced. Ice house, bait shop, a bar with a sign promising the best chowder anyone's grandmother never made. But there were no logos I recognized, just shapes I almost remembered. The diesel smell was heavier here, like a coat soaked once and never properly dried. It lived in the wood and the rope. It got in my throat and made the back of my tongue taste metal. A small schedule board hung by the gate with times embossed in plastic strip letters. Some rows had been peeled off and left a sticky shadow. The last row read "Only Printed Routes," which was not a time. Someone had added the word "only" in marker. Below the board, a box of paper schedules sat on a chain. I picked one up. The cardboard was soft with humidity. The times listed the crossings I knew. The 9:45 p.m. was there. Under it, in a smaller font, a line read, "Extra service as needed." No time. No name of boat. No star. No note 2. See agent, a tiny anchor stamped there, same as the one on my wrist. I could have made the choice then and kept the evening small. Find a bar light, sit where the door was in sight, drink something cold, listen for the bell, board the 9:45, go home. That would have been a good story that ends where it starts. Instead, I walked the dock as if following a thread I could not see, and when I reached the far end where the pilings went soft with age and a rail had been replaced by a rope, I found another gate. A sign on it said, "Gate 3" in paint, that had peeled into a map of its former self. Below it was a fresh metal plate that said, "Staff only," but somebody had hung it with wire instead of bolts. Beyond the gate, a narrow gangway angled down toward a ferry painted the kind of white that turns gray the minute it dries. The name on. The stern had been sanded off and rewritten in a blue that didn't match the rest. The letters spelled a word I did not know aloud. It might have been the name of a town. It might have been a number. The engine idled with a broken rhythm like a person clearing a throat that never clears. 2 quick horn notes came from beyond the breakwater, and the ferry in front of me answered with one tired note. The clerk's words came back to me with the precision of a receipt. Ignore the extra horn, and I did the opposite of that. I watched the faces of the few people waiting by the gate. They were the face you wear when you wait for a bus you cannot miss and cannot explain. The man in the gray cap from Gate 2 stood at the top of this gangway too, with his stamp and his torn stubs and his eyes that made rope look like a color. He was just far enough away that I could not tell if his mouth was smiling. He lifted a hand, not a wave, just the motion you make when you lay a quiet on a room, and opened the gate. "Board for extra service," he said, and the words landed like a pebble in a bowl. I should have walked away. I should have stuck with posted routes like a person who can follow instructions. I told myself it was a shuttle, half filled, harmless. I told myself I knew the boat shape and the smell of its old air and the way its deck pitched. I told myself a lot of small, dumb things that add up to bad decisions. I went down the gangway with the others and stepped on the deck and tried not to see that the last bench at the stern was still empty. The man in the cap stood in the same place he had. Stood at Gate 2 and tore returns and stamped wrists. When he took mine again, the stamp landing on the same anchor he'd made earlier, he did not look down. He looked at my eyes as if checking to see whether I was still the person he had stamped the first time. He pressed too long. The ink felt colder than before. "Not the last bench," he said, mild, as if passing me a napkin. "I heard," I said. And then I did something smart. I did not take it. I sat 2 benches up center, with my back to the rail and my eyes on the line of lights in the harbor. The older woman in the blue windbreaker took a place across from me. She kept her bag on her knees like a shield. She looked at my stamped wrist and then away. Not unfriendly, just as if we had both seen the same sign and were pretending not to. We pulled off the dock with the kind of push that makes your stomach slide sideways. The engine sound thickened into something with corners. The pilot didn't take the usual turn. He laid the boat against the far edge of the channel as if trying not to touch the water more than necessary. The thin horn from behind the breakwater sounded again. 2 notes, steady and close this time. Our ferry did not answer. A deckhand walked past with a canvas bag and an old punch. He watched where he put his feet like the deck had changed since last time. When he reached me, he punched the corner of my already torn return as if making a second, private tear inside the first. The tiny paper crescent fell and stuck to my shoe. He didn't look up when he spoke. "All crossings are 2-way, he said, the same hymn line, soft as exhaust. "Balance due on return. I paid round." "Trip?" I said. His eyes slid up then, tired and kind, like I had told him a joke he wished were funnier. "Not that sort," he said, and kept walking. The diesel rose into my nose thick as a glove and then settled. The harbor slid around us slower than it should have and faster in the wrong places. The lights of town drew themselves into lines. I didn't remember. The deck had that empty feel you get in rooms where no one wants to speak. The older woman put her palm over the stamped anchor on her wrist as if the ink could leak. The last bench waited like a mouth that hadn't quite finished a word. We came up under the bridge where traffic makes its own river of light, and the pilot took the boat into a pocket under the pilings where ferries don't go. The thin horn spoke from the dark, 2 notes clipped neat. The ferry engine went neutral, and the sudden lack of forward hum set my heart to counting. Water slapped the hull in impatient little hands. A man in a rain shell stepped out from the stair to the wheelhouse. He had the gray cap in his hand now, and without it, he looked younger and older at once. He leaned on the rail and studied the last bench like it might argue with him. When he spoke, he didn't raise his voice, but the sound reached everyone, as if the air carried it for him. "Payment," he said. No one moved. Coins chimed once, the saddest little sound, from someone's pocket. The man shook his head almost kindly. "Not that sort," he said, same as the deckhand. "All crossings are 2-way. What did you bring?" A woman near the bow held up her phone like a person who has learned that phones make problems go away. "I paid," she said. "Look." She showed a glowing screen to a night that did not have screens. The man did not look. "What did you bring?" he said again, and the diesel smell lifted and settled as if to underline the question. The older woman across from me spoke like a person who had rehearsed. "I brought my husband's watch," she said, and her hand went to her pocket and came, Out empty. Her face did not change. I thought I did. The man nodded like a teacher who hears the right answer and keeps his face still. Balance due, he said, two-way. The choice came to me like a coin rolled across a table, and I did not like either side. The clerk at the first booth had told me 3 rules. I had already broken the first. I had obeyed the second. The sealed third, ignore the extra horn, had been a failure in my body, not my ears. I'm not a person who brings pocketable meaning to a ferry. I had fries, grease, and a paper ticket and a wallet that held nothing anybody on this boat seemed to want. What counts? I asked, because sometimes asking out loud keeps you upright. The man's mouth did something you could have called a smile if you were generous, something you can't replace that you would try to, he said, something that makes the crossing, not free. I thought of a ring in a dish by my sink at home that doesn't belong to anyone anymore. I thought of a photograph of my grandmother who used to ride the old river ferry in a dress with a white collar. I thought of my own name spoken, at the wrong time, by a voice that sounded like mine. I put my hand over the stamp on my wrist without meaning to, and felt the cool ink that had already dried. I didn't bring anything like that, I said, and my voice wobbled like the water. Then don't sit, he said, and raised his chin toward the last bench. A different kind of quiet went through the deck. It felt like the air when thunder thinks about it. The older woman squeezed her bag and looked at me, and I looked at her, and neither of us looked behind us. The ferry shifted in some current I could not see. "We'll wait," the man said, as if we had all the time in the harbor, and the horn and the bridge didn't matter. "Balance due, two-way." It takes a long time for nothing to happen. The diesel breathed. Traffic thudded above us. Somewhere a chain clinked and found a new rung. The deck creaked like a house that is considering a story. The man in the cap watched our faces, and also watched the last bench like people watch exit doors in crowded theaters. A kid, teenager, too old to be protected and too young to know it, stood up with a little jerk of motion like a fish that decides the line is a joke. He walked toward the stern fast because fast makes it easier. The older woman said, "No," soft and late. The deckhand started to move and then didn't. The boy sat on the last bench. His weight didn't even make the boat rock. The man in the cap lifted a hand, not a blessing, not a stop, just the motion people make when they agree with themselves. The thin horn sounded twice, close enough to taste, and the ferry engine took the gear like a jaw taking a bite, and we were moving again, out from under the bridge, into the throat of the channel. The boy stayed where he was, shoulders up, trying to look like he had done the smart thing. We slid into open water fast, wrong fast for the distance. The harbor lights pulled apart the way lights do when water lies you. The extra horn called again, and our ferry did not answer, and the diesel went up a note and held. We docked where we had started, or where a version of it had always been. The gate clanged. The man in the cap stamped wrists as we went by. His stamp hit the same anchor on my skin and made it colder for a second, like the mark had been made fresh inside, not out. When he tore the return this time, he folded the tiny paper crescent and pressed it into my palm without looking, like a gift no one wants. The little curve weighed nothing. It felt like a coin of paper. "Balance due," he said, the way a cashier says "have a nice day." "I didn't sit," I said before I could stop myself. He lifted his eyes. "Then you still owe," he said, polite as weather. I walked off the boat into the same harbor, and not the same. The lights tasted right. The signs looked like logos again. People's voices fell back into their ordinary rattle. The diesel smell thinned. My phone blipped to life and showed the message it always shows when it finds itself again. "Missed you." The app displayed the 9:45 p.m. as departed and a gray line that said, "Last ferry of the night." My wrist anchor looked lighter already, as if skin had eaten the ink. At the edge of the parking lot, with the town hot even in the dark, because asphalt is a miser, I opened my hand. The paper crescent lay there like a thumbnail I did not remember, cutting. The printed word "return" curved along the edge. On the back, in pencil I hadn't felt, Someone had written a time. 3:17 a.m. Not a fairy time, not a tourist time, a time that sits in the chest like a stone. I put the crescent in my pocket because throwing it away near the water felt like an invitation. I drove home with the windows cracked 2 fingers because of the smell, though if you asked me which smell, I would have said I didn't know. My apartment has no water view. It has a street that pretends to sleep and a neighbor who moves furniture at hours that suggest ghosts or bad work habits. I locked my door and put my keys in their dish and took a shower that smelled like city, water and soap that promises nonsense. I told myself that I had sat on a ferry I shouldn't have, and a kid had sat where he shouldn't have, and that I had not paid for that choice with anything. I told myself other people's rules do not mean me. I told myself a lot of things that helped for almost 1 hour. At 3:17 a.m., a horn blew somewhere that was not the harbor. Not loud. Thin. 2 quick notes with a breath between them. The sound laid itself across the floor like a line. The diesel smell that says somebody else is handling the heavy work came up through the slots of my old radiator and slid along the baseboards and made the room feel 2 degrees smaller. I stood in my kitchen and opened my hand. The paper crescent was not there. The sink smelled faintly of salt. On the counter lay my ferry ticket, which I had left in my other pocket, the return half clammy and newly torn, the tiny curve missing like a bite. When the sun came up, the room went back to being made of normal air. I found the paper crescent tucked into the rubber of my front door like a flyer someone had tried to push through the crack. I put it in a jar with screws and a dead pen because that was the only safe I own. The anchor on my wrist went to a pale, bruise, and then to nothing by noon. I went about my stupid summer errands like a person who didn't owe anything to anyone. I keep the rules now, even inland. Board only what's posted. Don't take the last bench, even in waiting rooms that are not boats. When a sound comes wrong and asks to be noticed, I notice and then I practice not answering. It sounds like superstition. It sounds like nothing. Most days are nothing. Nights are usually nothing too. Once in a while, when the wind turns through, the buildings in my street smells like hot breaks and summer garbage. A thinner smell threads it. Old diesel. Cold ink. On those nights, my phone wakes itself at 3:17 a.m. with no notification on the screen, and somewhere low and far a horn gives 2 notes, patient as a debt collector who knows where you live. Story number 6. Lifeguard off duty. I went back to the public pool because I missed the shape of a long lane under bright lights. The simple math of back and forth until your mind goes quiet. Summer in the city had layered heat on top of noise, until my apartment felt like a dryer that forgot to turn off. The pool promised a different kind of heat, the wet kind that leaves at the edge of the deck. It also promised rules, which I like in small doses. Rules make a box you can rest in. At the front desk, the teenager with the sunburn pressed a plastic wristband into my palm and pointed the barcode at the scanner until it beeped. The band was the disposable kind that snaps once and then lives on your wrist until scissors say the word. It had the pool logo in blue and a tiny number stamped near the closure. Mine said 4. The teen slid a laminated card across the counter for me to sign and jabbed it with a finger at each line as if the ink would not land without his help. No swimming after dusk, he said in the board recital that tells you it has been explained too many times. Whistle means out. Return the float to hook 4 when you're done. Hook 4 sat on the far wall with the other hooks, each with a black number stenciled above it. The floats were those soft blue kickboards with the bites out of the corners where teeth had tested foam. The teen added, "We close the deck at 9. Lifeguards off duty after 8:30. Adult lap only after 8. I said, "You'll still be here?" He tapped the stack of folded towels. "I'm front desk," he said, which meant no, not on the deck. Lights shut themselves. Off. It's automatic. He scratched his arm where the sun had left a white line from a watch he must have taken off. "Don't make me chase you," he added, but it came out friendly. Inside, the air smelled like every pool I've ever known. Humid, a little tired. that sting that climbs the back of your nose when the chlorine sits up to be counted. The room seemed brighter than outside, like a reversed day. The lifeguard chair was empty. A red rescue tube lay across it like a sleeping thing. 2 people swam slow in lanes 1 and 2. Lane 3 had a flutterboard abandoned on the gutter, one corner wet dark and the rest dry, which means someone had thought better of it at the last second. I snapped the band on with the cheap certainty of plastic and let it bite so it wouldn't float off. The little number 4 faced the floor. I slid into lane 4 to honor it. Small superstition, harmless, and let the water take my outline and make it simpler. First lap, I remembered breath. Second lap, I remembered shoulders. Third lap, the background noise became a metronome. The pump hum is steady until you listen to it too long and imagine shapes inside it. I tried not to listen too long. By the 10th lap, I had that good blank feeling like a page that's been rested on and left smooth. The other 2 swimmers climbed out and put their towels over their heads in priestly shapes and walked soft-footed to the benches. The lifeguard chair sat 10 feet away and somehow felt farther. Above it, the ceiling skylights showed an evening that had turned from white to the peach that makes every window a postcard. Dusk was a word on the wall clock's face, not an exact time. I told myself I would obey the spirit of the rule. I would swim until the light in the skylight stopped being light, and then I would stop. On lap 12, underwater, I heard a whistle, short and clean, from above, from nowhere. I popped up because that is what the sound does to bodies that have learned to obey it. The chair was empty, no one on deck. The 2 swimmers had gone. Water made its own tiny slaps at the gutter. The rescue tube across the chair looked a little more red. I held the edge and counted to 5 like a person who prides themselves on not being jumpy. On count 3, the whistle sounded again. Not loud. The exact tone you hear when a lifeguard points. 2 fingers toward the ladder, and you are 13 and too confident. The empty chair did not have a mouth. I swam another lap because a choice has to be made somewhere, and mine was made by body memory. When a whistle blows, you get 1 more lap if nobody is yelling. It goes like that. The water smelled sharper for a moment, that chlorine sting that sits high behind the eyes. I turned at the wall and saw a small change that did not matter, and then did. Hook 4 was empty. I had not taken a float yet. Hook 3 had a flutterboard hanging from it with a bite out of the corner. Hook 5 had a faded pull buoy. 4 had nothing. On the deck under it, a single drop of water gathered itself and let go and hit the concrete with a sound you hear, only when everything else is holding its breath. The whistle came again. 2 notes, a beat between them that felt too polite. I climbed out because I am not a person who antagonizes rules. I looked up at the skylights. The peach had folded into a deeper color that had its own humidity to it. Dusk, then. The posted sign did not have a clock beside it. It had the word dusk in block letters. I walked to the hooks and took a float I did not need and hung it on 4 to complete the picture. When the foam slid into the number's shadow, the whistle did not sound. I laughed once without meaning to. The quiet kind, that pushes out of you when something small lands how you wanted. I told myself I would rinse and go. In the locker room, the fluorescent bulbs hummed like insects. My eyes had that chemical blur that pools give you when you stay long enough to feel young, and then remember you are not. I rinsed my face, and the sting behind my nose folded itself. Smaller, but did not leave. When I came back into the pool room, the lights felt a shade cooler than 10 minutes before. The lifeguard chair was still empty. The red tube lay at a different angle, barely, as if a person had brushed it with a thigh passing by. On the deck near the deep end, a wet footprint glowed dull, and then went matte. It was not barefoot. It had the waffle texture of those pool sandals that leave ghost patterns on concrete. I could have left. Another good ending. Towels, locker, the hot evening, a walk home with salt on my skin that belongs to the pool, not the ocean. Instead, I did a thing so small I still want to argue with myself about it. I slid back into lane 4 to cool down with 4 easy laps. The whistle did not blow. I told myself that meant permission from an empty seat, which is a sentence that should call itself out and didn't. Second cool down lap, the far light over lanes 7 and 8 flickered and stayed on, and then came back a shade paler. I breathed. On the 2 and the 4, because numbers are a kind of prayer when you are tired. When I reached my wall, the flutter board on the gutter was gone. I did not see the moment it left. The water held its shape for a second longer than it should have, as if the board had been there and then evaporated without taking its own displacement with it. I climbed out. The plastic wristband felt tighter by a breath. When I twisted it, to see the little number, the number was a smear. Sweat can do that. So can pool water. I went to get my towel. The hook where I'd left it was empty, and then my towel was on the bench, folded into a stranger's rectangle like a person had tried to guess how I do it and been a little wrong. A wet line cut the deck from the far ladder to the middle like someone had walked with care not to splash. The clock over the office door said 8:28 p.m. In the glass of the office window, I could see the front desk teen watching his own phone. He did not look up. I smiled because he was not a lifeguard, and it would not be his job even if he were. The whistle blew again, one neat note, more like an old recording of a whistle than the thing itself lived. The sound lived where the chair lived. I stood with the towel like a flag and my body wanting to react, and my mind wanting to argue, and felt something like heat at the back of my throat where chlorine likes to stand and stare. I broke the rule then, not the dusk one, the other one. Whistle means out. I did not go out. I picked up the blue kickboard from hook 4 where I had resettled it and carried it to the shallow end and put it on the water like a raftsman laying a palm on a horse to show it his welcome. My idea was very small. 2 lengths with a float. Pathetic even. I have never known how pathetic can be the loudest thing you do. The board didn't want to sit on the water. It skated and then stopped as if a hand caught it from underneath. I set my palms on it, and it sank a half-inch further than hands ought to make it. My shoulders felt a touch on both sides, the way you feel current that is not a current. I looked under my arms out of habit and saw only water and lane rope. I pushed off and let my legs do the work and counted kicks until counting felt less like comfort and more like a test. Halfway down the lane, the overhead lights whispered and then came back. The echo changed in the room for a beat, like a person had stepped in and stepped out. By the time I reached the far wall, the whistle was blowing again. 3 short notes, too polite to be angry and too exact to be random. I stood in chest-high water and let the board float up and waited for the noise to stop. Around me the surface made that tiny push you see when someone else's hand runs along the underside, and you tell yourself it was you. I climbed out because even I have a line, and mine is, "Don't argue with an empty chair." The deck felt colder. I walked to the hooks to put the float back. 1, 2, 3. Someone had hung up a second float on 4, newer and darker blue, the foam unbitten. The one in my hand was chewed and beloved like a dog toy. I looked at the new one and then at the old one, and the old one was heavier than foam and water and insult has any right to be. I rehung the old one on hook 4 because finishing small tasks puts a frame around nerves. The whistle kept its mouth shut, which felt like approval, which is a junk feeling I do not recommend to anyone over the age of 15. 8:30 p.m. The teenager stuck his head out of the office window and called, "We're closing the deck, folks." He said folks like there were more of us than me. He waved, not unkindly. "You're good," he added, which made no sense and did at the same time. A moment later he left the window. The office light clicked off. The pool room light stayed on, but one strip along the deep end took itself a shade lower, like it had read a schedule from a different night. I walked to the door that leads to the locker room. The push bar did not push. I tried the other door. It had a sign that said alarm will sound if opened after hours. I pressed the bar a hair, and the hinge made the throat-clearing sound of a thing that both will and will not complain. I let it go, because nothing in me wanted to be the person who makes a noise at a pool at night. From the far side of the room, near the lifeguard chair, a shape stood and then sat. Not dramatic. Human movement, simple as physics. The chair was empty when I looked straight at it. In the reflection in the window, it was not. A figure in a red suit, not the bright new red from fancy catalogs, but the sun-faded red that looks like brick at dusk, sat with a rescue tube across their lap and one foot loose on the rung. The foot made a little back-and-forth half-circle that people do without thinking, in the reflection only. In the room, the chair was still a sculpture nobody had dusted. The smell of chlorine sharpened again. The sting tapped the bridge of my nose and stepped into my eyes like it belonged to me. I blinked hard and the water line doubled, and then fused and then doubled again like my vision had learned to swim and was showing off. The whistle sounded once, short, and perfect. The sound lived in both places at once, the reflection and the air that my ears had to share. In the reflection, the figure pointed at the deep-end ladder with two fingers the way lifeguards do when they are telling you the safe way out. In the room, empty metal caught light where a wrist might have and glinted like jewelry. I said, "Okay," out loud, to be the kind of person who cooperates, and then because I am also the kind who argues, I took a step toward the nearest shallow end, ladder instead. The whistle pealed twice, very soft, and the second note had the weight of a smile you do not like. The empty chair stayed empty in the room and full of duty in the window. I put my foot on the shallow ladder, and water lapped at my shin like a hand reconsidering. The bar on the sliding deck door toward the parking lot shivered like a lock with bad teeth. The fluorescent strip over lane 6 flickered and stayed off for a breath and came back. The pump hum climbed one pitch and then dropped two. It sounded like a throat trying to clear itself around a word. I went to the deep-end ladder because giving in is a kind of intelligence when the other option is noise. The water there was darker by a degree that could be explained by depth and by a degree that could not. When I set my hand on the rail, it felt cold. Not metal cold, but pond cold. I took a step down anyway, and the water cupped my knees and told my skin a story about summers when fear meant nothing more than the diving board looked higher than it was. Halfway down the ladder, my plastic wristband bit. Not tight like skin, swelling. Tight like the band had shortened. The little number faced up now, and I could read it because the smear had become sharp again. It did not say 4 anymore, it said 2. The whistle blew once. The red suit in the window did something with a hand I recognized from every boring safety lecture in the world. Palm down, cut across the air. Out. I went up instead of down because disobedience gets in muscle memory too if you let it. When my feet hit the deck, the fight went out of the hum the way it does when the compressor in a fridge sighs and gives up for a while. The room felt like the moment at the end of a storm before you hear birds. I set both hands on the rescue tube on the empty lifeguard chair to prove to myself that there was no human under physics and that objects were only objects. The strap was wet. The red fabric left a damp line on my palm that smelled like plastic and the end of a long day. The whistle did not blow. The lights over lanes 1 through 4 dimmed one tooth on a gear I could not see. The dimness did not reach lane 5, which was the lane with the drain that has always made me a little nervous because everyone has a dumb thing they are a little nervous about, and this one is mine. I am not afraid of drains. I am afraid of the rules of water bending without telling me. I took my towel. I went to the door again. The push bar said no. The other door said alarm. The office window said no one home. In the reflection of the window glass, the lifeguard sat with forearms on thighs and watched me with the white-eyed patience of someone who knows you will obey eventually. I said, "I get it," like I was the responsible adult and I did not. Point of no return is a phrase that sounds like drama. Mine was small. I took the new unbitten float off hook 4 and walked it to the edge of lane 5 and slid it onto the water. I told myself I would paddle out to the center, sit on it, and laugh at myself for bringing a toy into my own fear. I told myself I would leave it in the middle like a dare to the reflection. I told myself many things that are knives with soft handles. The float did not hold my weight. That is not surprising. It is also the exact surprise you can't talk yourself out of when it happens anyway. I kicked, and the board skated, and then tilted, and then stopped as if the water had been taught how to be floor. Something brushed my calf, not a hand, not a fish. The sense you get when water knows your outline and edits it. The chlorine told my eyes it lived here, and I did not. I breathed wrong, and coughed and told myself to stop being foolish. The whistle blew 3 times, quiet as compassion. I grabbed the board and pushed it away and swam, clumsy, eyes burning, to the deep ladder because being told what to do sometimes feels like a bridge. When my hand found the rail, the water tugged like a coat sleeve caught on a nail. Not a lot. Enough. I yanked harder than necessary and knocked my wrist against the rung. The plastic band snapped. It didn't break the way cheap things break. It snapped closed around the ladder rail like a circle that had been waiting for a circle. I climbed out without it. My skin where it had been felt colder than the rest of me, as if metal had been there, not plastic. I stood dripping on the deck, and the new float drifted toward the center of Lane 5, as if a person pulled it along with a patient arm. In the window, the lifeguard stood. In the room, the chair sat empty. The figure in the reflection lifted the rescue tube and set it over a shoulder as casual as a cardigan and pointed at hook 4. "Return it." I said, "You can have it," because sometimes when you are scared, your mouth says the thing your head won't. I backed away, and the rubber soles of my sandals squeaked on wet that had not been there a second before, and I hated that more than anything else, the way wet appears in a neat line parallel to where your foot is going to go. I reached the office window and banged with my open hand like a person who has abandoned dignity. The front desk teen startled and looked up and put his hands out the way people do when they are saying, "Wait to a baby or a dog." "Door's stuck," I said. "I need out." He stood and disappeared, and a second later the lock thunked somewhere, and the push bar worked, like aluminum is a suggestion. The hall smelled like normal air. I wanted to put that smell in my mouth and live on it. I turned back once, the way you look back at a house you're leaving to make sure you haven't forgotten a sweater. The pool room sat as it always sits. The lights over lanes 1 through 4 were back up to full, as if they had never learned a new trick. The float in Lane 5 bobbed at the gutter like someone had nudged it home. Hook 4 held a blue kickboard with no bites, and a second older one leaned against the wall below it, leaving a wet stamp on the concrete like a signature I could not imitate. In the locker room, I dressed without thinking of comfort. The mirror made 2 of me, and then 1 again the way fluorescent bulbs do when they are tired. The chlorine sting had moved into my hair and behind my ears, and every time I blinked my eyes told me a fact I didn't need. This place has rules, and the rules will always find a way to be the last thing said. The teenager brought my bag to me without being asked, which is a small kindness that felt like religion. "Sorry," he said. "Sometimes the lock thinks it's flex time." "What's flex time?" I asked, because talking about a silly problem is better than discussing the kind that lives in mirrors. "Like the door swells," he said, "from the humidity." He looked down at my wrist like a person looks at a name tag, and then did a double take because there was no band. "Oh," he said. "Did you take your band off? We need it back at the desk for the count." "It snapped on the ladder," I said. "Lane 5. He made a face that meant a clipboard was going to have a box without a check mark. "It happens," he said. "We'll find it tomorrow." Outside, the evening did that sweet thing where the heat finally admits it was bluffing. The sky over the trees had that purple edge that means the day traded hands for the night. I carried my bag to the car and caught the smell of chlorine 1 more time in the air, and told myself I would be home in 10 minutes, and I would stand in my shower, and the water would smell like pipes and city and soap, not like anyone's job. In my bathroom, I turned the water on, and the steam took itself seriously in seconds. I rubbed at my wrist where the band had bitten and thought of the number, how it had gone from 4 to 2, and told myself I would laugh about that with a person later, and they would say, "Stop," and I would say, "I know," and we would Both feel smarter than plastic. I wiped a circle on the mirror with my hand. The glass smelled like cleaner. My apartment smelled like my apartment. At 3:17 a.m., a whistle blew in my hallway. Not loud, close. The exact pitch of a polite correction laid like a ruler over your intentions. 3 notes. I sat up, and the dark had the depth of water. The chlorine sting woke in the back of my nose like someone had turned a small dial and set it there. I listened for footsteps that were not mine. My wall made the tick it makes when the air moves and then made a new sound, like rubber sliding. Along paint, I got up. I went to the bathroom not because I am brave, but because a task feels safer than listening. On the sink sat a plastic wristband. Pool logo. Fresh, not rough with pool rash. The tiny number stamped near the closure said 1. The band felt warm. When I touched it, not from the room, warm like skin. A pale line circled my wrist where the old band had been. The new one had left a small wet mark on the porcelain like it had carried itself in from somewhere that had drains. I put the band into the drawer, where I keep spare batteries and rubber bands and a bag of screws in case something wants to return, as a picture frame. I closed the drawer and put my hand on it like a person using a lid to keep a thing from getting breath. The apartment settled its shoulders. The smell of chlorine drifted back into smallness and left the more honest smells behind: dust, laundry, a lemon dish soap lye. The next afternoon, a charge hit my bank card from the pool. Replacement band fee. The memo line said, balance due. I laughed once because that is what you do when an invoice makes a joke you don't want to understand. I told myself it was a billing system doing its job and not a mirror doing mine. I go back sometimes. Not at night or not on purpose. When I do, I follow the rules like a person who believes. No swimming after dusk. Whistle means out. Return the float to hook 4. I do not touch lane 5 if I can help it. I keep my eyes on the skylights and let their light tell me what to do. I keep my hands off the rescue tube because I don't need to find out how wet fabric can be without water. The plastic wristband from my drawer has a way of showing up where I'm not looking for it. Once on the floor by my front door, pointing its little number at the threshold like advice. Once on the passenger seat of my car. Once in my gym bag on a morning I was sure I had not packed it. The number has gone down to 0 and then to nothing at all. The little stamp blank, as if the band had never had a job. The chlorine sting arrives at the back of my nose on evenings when there is no pool anywhere near me, and it makes me close my eyes and count to 4 like a child who has learned how to swim by memorizing points of the compass. Sometimes in that soft edge of night when your building's hum drops 1 note and finds itself again, a whistle goes in the hall, 1 neat breath and then 2, and I do not open my door. I picture a red suit folded in a chair that is empty when I face it and occupied when I catch it sideways in the black square of a window. I picture a blue float on hook 4 that wasn't there before and will be there when I look, because rules are objects when they want to be. Last night, when I washed my hands and reached for the towel, the plastic band lay coiled on the sink. It was snapped closed. I did not put it there. It looked like something waiting for a wrist it already knew. Story number 7. Fireworks behind the hills. I went back to my hometown for a weekend because the city had turned into a skillet, and I wanted nights that smelled like cut grass instead of hot breaks. My mother's porch faces a shallow valley, with a ridgeline that cuts the horizon like a ruler. In July, the town does fireworks on the fairgrounds, and from this porch, you can't see them directly, but you can hear them and watch the hills take the color the way a face takes a secret. Slow, then sudden. On the fridge, my mother keeps a magnet with a handwritten list that looks like a recipe for being a good neighbor. Rule 1, fireworks end by 10. Rule 2, don't count the extra burst. Rule 3, keep porches dark. She pointed to the list and smiled like we were both in on an old joke. Folks get excited, she said. Someone always tries to stretch it. Don't help them. At the diner earlier that day, the waitress gave me a paper matchbook with the town logo stamped in red, the old water tower with the crooked hat on top, She slid it over with the receipt like she remembered I used to be the kid who pocketed matchbooks for no reason. I hadn't carried matches in years, but I kept it in my pocket because the logo made me feel gently loyal to a past that had the edges sanded off. The matchbook felt soft from too many fingers, and one match had its head rubbed dull, like someone had started to strike and then changed their mind. By dusk, the air sat warm and honest, and the cicadas made that unbroken blade of sound that cleans you out from the inside. My mother went to bed early the way she does now, with a blanket folded at the foot of her bed for the hour of the night when old houses invent breezes. I took a lawn chair to the porch and did what I always did as a teenager, listened to the hills and pretended I could read them. The first bang came easy and far, the good kind, tidy as punctuation. I could see a soft blush behind the ridge, a rise of red that turned the leaves to coins for a breath. The show stitched itself along the unseen fairgrounds, and every burst made a small wind that took a second to arrive. The neighborhood stayed dark because rules hold when people agree to like them. Even the porch motion lights behaved. It felt ordinary and kind. The red in the sky went like a pulse and then died and returned. I checked the time the way people do, pointlessly. 9:30 p.m. The stove clock inside showed the same, its red numbers making a little window in the kitchen. The porch had no clock, but in small towns you don't need one. You can count the songs a night takes to move itself along. A boy, 2 houses over, whispered to his sister not to count. He said it in the gentle voice that older brothers use when they want to make a rule feel like a secret. She sang numbers anyway under her breath, the way children sing when they want to prove they can do something, even if nobody is keeping score. The finale came at 9:57 p.m. You can tell when a show decides to hurry. The sound stack thickened. The hills found every color and held them until you couldn't remember which one the sky used to be. When it stopped like a door shut softly by someone who knows who is asleep inside. I waited because everyone waits. 3 or 4 beats, long enough to be sure you are finished being impressed, and then the cheer rose from the fairgrounds like a warm sheet, reached the hills, and thinned out. At 9:59 p.m., a single red flare went up behind the ridge and bloomed in silence. There was no sound. It made the hills look briefly rimmed in brake lights. The boy 2 doors down began to count out loud like he had been saving the word one in his cheek. "Don't count," his brother said louder, this time. The red hung and then died like a thought you decide not to have. I told myself somebody at the fairgrounds had extra inventory and a bad sense of boundaries. I told myself time is soft at the edges in places like this. I told myself a lot of helpful little lies that let me keep my feet in one spot. The stove clock inside clicked its minute forward and showed 10:01 p.m. The porch had no light to click. I kept the chair in the dark because the list on the fridge felt like a neighbor holding my hand. Fireflies stitched green nails through the lower dark. Something small moved in the hydrangeas and went quiet like it had goals. At 10:03 p.m., a single report cracked the air. Not big, not showy, just a clean boom like a door slammed 2 streets over. A red wash ran the ridge and came across the porch like someone had opened the world's biggest refrigerator full of warm light. My tongue tasted like a spent match, though I hadn't struck anything. I remembered the matchbook in my pocket and put a palm on it without thinking. It felt warmer than it should, like it had borrowed heat from a pocket I wasn't wearing. I made a rule for myself to sit still and borrow my mother's steadiness. The boy 2 doors down whispered numbers, and his brother whispered no, and both whispers braided into something that felt like prayer. The cicadas did not falter. The extra burst did not come again. The porch stayed a generous kind of dark. When I went inside, the stove clock read 10:01 p.m. Again. I thought I had seen it switch to 10:03 p.m. on the porch. I must have been wrong, or I had done the thing with time you do when you hold a number in your head and decide you saw it on a device. I tapped the clock button just to be a person in control, and the red numbers blinked and resigned themselves to 10:01 p.m. The matchbook on the counter left a pale arc on the laminate where humidity bled from cardboard. The next day was the part nobody puts in stories about fireworks, the hot board day after, where kids pick up paper rings from spent mortars in ditches and everyone's dog looks guilty but isn't. I ran errands for my mother and kept catching red in places it didn't belong. A car's brake light washed too far into a service bay and made a shadow look like it had a pulse. A reflection in the window of the hardware store flashed my shirt red when I walked past a rack of dull lawn chairs. The matchbook rode in my pocket like a coin I didn't want to spend. By afternoon, I told myself I was being silly and made something silly into homework. I checked the town site. The schedule said fireworks 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., period. No note about cleanup pops. No approved extra. No explanation for a red that lived longer than the noise. In the comments under the post, someone from the parks office had replied to a neighbor's complaint with 4 words. Please don't count them. That night I kept the porch dark again because rules are a spine your fear can lean against. No official show. Just a Saturday with left-behind celebrations on private acreage out by the hills. At 9:40 p.m., a low train of little reports padded along the ridge like a polite dog. A red winked and went out. A white made it look like snow behind. A door. An ambulance in town took a far street and brought its own red with it. And for a few seconds, all the reds stood on each other's shoulders, and the hills looked like a decision about to be made. At 10 p.m., the neighborhood cheered or did not. You can't tell from the porch. The cicadas pressed the blade again. Somewhere someone shut a cooler in a way that made a slap. In the dark, our little street felt like a stage not being used. At 10:02 p.m., my phone buzzed even though I had set it to be a good guest and shut up. A town alert that should have been sent hours ago arrived now with a friendly tone that made my stomach go cold. Thanks for attending tonight's show, it said. Finale extended to 10:05 p.m. due to a wind delay. The timestamp on the message said 10:02 p.m. I stared at those digits until they were shapes and not numbers. The wind had been as honest as a held breath since dinner. I looked to the ridge because that is all a person can do. A single red went up and held without sound all the way across the hills where I could not see. The porch went red and stayed red long enough for me to think of the fire exit lights in the high school gym and the emergency LED on our old answering machine, and the little red dot inside my mother's electric toothbrush that means, please charge me, and how every red in our lives is a request. The red faded but did not die. It made a line along the ridge like a far road caught fire. I put my hand on the matchbook on the table and felt the cardboard soften into my skin. Don't count, my mother said from the hallway. Her voice, all sanded edges, not alarmed, just tired of explaining things to time. She didn't turn on any lights. She sat in the dark living room like a person watching a storm pretend to arrive. I'm not, I said, which was half true because in my head the number 1 had already stood up and taken a bow. The kitchen stove clock clicked to 10:03 p.m. The clock on my phone said 10:04 p.m. The microwave argued for 9:59 p.m., like it held a grudge. The matchbook had left a darker crescent on the counter, like a sweat mark made by an object instead of a person. I took one match out and turned it in my fingers. The head left a red dust that did not come off on my skin. At 10:05 p.m., nothing happened, and then everything did. A deep, late, wrong boom from the ridge threw a soft body of air across our street. The hydrangea leaves shivered with it. The porch turned red again, brighter than a reflection should be, and in the red I saw the way the paint had split along the railing and the line of old tape along the storm door, and the white of my mother's knuckles where she held the arms of the chair. The boy 2 doors down began to count, slow this time, like he meant to make each number matter. His brother did not correct him. He let the numbers go, and the numbers went, and each one pulled the next into the open like beads on a string. I stood, up with no plan because standing is what bodies do when time changes shape. I thought I would go inside and break the line between Red and me, and maybe the stove clock would have the sense to choose a minute and hold it. I took a step and a soft, red flicker like a camera flash from the 70s pulsed through the kitchen from no source at all. For a second the stove number showed 10:09 p.m., then 10:01 p.m. again. The match between my fingers felt warm as if it had been struck in a different room. I made a decision I can't defend. I went to the fridge and took down the magnet list and set it on the counter as if rules do better when you put them in your hands. Keep porches dark. Don't count the extra burst. Fireworks end by 10. I said the last one out loud like a password. End by 10. Outside, the red glowed and thinned, pulsed and thinned. The boy reached 7 and the number sounded like someone walking down a hall. At 8, the street's motion light came on at the end of the block as if the light believed time had a body you could set off. At 9, I put the match back into the book and closed the flap and put the book in the drawer because I didn't want it in the room with me anymore. The 10th number came out of the kid's mouth like a note a bell learns from a hand. The red died. The hills went back to being an honest dark. The stove clock clicked to 10:06 p.m. like a dog coming when it is called. The phone alert on my screen redrew itself and replaced the words finale extended with a simple thank you in black and white. In the comments under the post, the park's office had replied to a different neighbor with 3 words. Porch lights, please. I slept the way people sleep after they talk big and then obey small things. In the morning, the town smelled like smoke and sugar. In the ditch on the road to the store, paper rings from mortars lay like birds that had been cut out and put back. The matchbook had a faint red smear on its back that I hadn't seen the day before, a half moon of color like someone had pressed it into a painted surface and counted to 1 before lifting. I drove back to the city in a tired heat that made the highway a mirage. I told myself the extra burst was kids with leftover shells and a parent who thinks rules are suggestions. I told myself clocks disagree even in calm houses. I told myself the alert had lagged because all networks shrug at small towns. I set the matchbook in the kitchen drawer with rubber bands and a dead pen because even souvenirs should be stored like objects and not like friends. That night in my apartment far from hills, I kept the lights low because I couldn't help it. Just after 10, a faint red came through the slats of my blinds and made my living room the color of a warning. I live across the street from a grocery store that puts up no fireworks. A delivery truck idled by the loading dock with its brake lights stuck in a fussy rhythm, and the red lay on my walls like a cloth. The cicadas in my city do a thinner job, but they tried. The matchbook in the drawer clicked against something. When the building settled, the small sound you get when cardboard argues with wood. At 10:02 p.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from a town app I hadn't opened in years. Thanks for attending, it said. The timestamp said 10:02 p.m. My city's clock on the stove said 9:59 p.m. Stubborn. The microwave took the park's office's side and held to 10:01 p.m. I laughed once because laughing gives you back breath and because rules in one place should not reach this far. At 3:17 a.m., the red found my apartment again, even though the truck was long gone and the store was asleep. It came from nowhere a person could point to. It made my window the shape of a signal. The drawer in the kitchen slid a 1/4 inch on its runner like someone searching without care. When I opened it, the matchbook sat on top of everything with its flap tucked into itself the way a mouth holds a word. One match was missing. I could feel on the air that it had been struck. The smell was not sulfur. It was the warm after-scent of paper that has been asked for a small light. In the morning, a new notification had arrived while I slept. A photo from my camera roll had made a memory. I had taken no photo. The thumbnail was black with a thin red line, like a horizon invented from a bruise. The timestamp on the photo said 10:05 p.m. yesterday. When I tapped it open, the screen showed a still of my own wall washed in red, nothing more. It should have been nothing. It felt like a little door. I keep a few new rules now on my own fridge, in my own handwriting that looks less sure than my mother's. Keep porches dark. Don't count the extra burst. Fireworks end by 10. even where there are no fireworks. When red comes through the blinds at the wrong time, I let it be light and do not name it. When the phone tells me I've attended something I didn't attend, I press and hold and delete, and then I live with the way my finger stays warm. Last, night. The brake lights at the store made a red line on my ceiling and then went out. My stove clock clicked to 10:01 p.m. The microwave argued for 10:03 p.m. The matchbook in the drawer made no sound at all. I told myself it was over. I told myself small towns keep their own weather. I told myself a whole list of things that make sleep easier. This morning the matchbook sat on the porch step when I opened the door, soft and warm, a new red half-moon pressed into the back. Someone had tucked one spent match back under the flap, burned to the stripe and no farther, as if whoever struck it had counted to 1 and stopped. The head had left a perfect red kiss in the cardboard that made the water tower's crooked hat look like it was lit from within.